The surprisingly quiet life of an 1800s lighthouse keeper. Before we light the lamp. Good evening, my friend. Tonight, I'd like to invite you somewhere far from crowded cities, busy roads, and glowing phone screens. Instead, imagine a lonely stone tower standing patiently upon a rocky coastline. The year is somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. The ocean stretches farther than your eyes can follow, gently breathing beneath a silver moon. There are no engines. No airplanes. No traffic. Only the endless rhythm of waves arriving exactly where they have arrived for thousands of years. This is the home of a lighthouse keeper. And, surprisingly, it is much quieter than you might imagine. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable. Perhaps adjust your blanket just a little. Let your shoulders soften, unclench your jaw, and allow today's worries to drift out with the tide. There is absolutely nothing you need to accomplish tonight. No lessons to memorize. No mysteries to solve. Only a slow journey into one of history's calmest occupations. You may even fall asleep before our lighthouse lamp is lit. If that happens, you have succeeded perfectly. The first thing you notice is the smell. Long before you see the lighthouse itself, you smell the sea. Salt. Wet stone. Seaweed drying on dark rocks. A faint hint of smoke drifting from the keeper's chimney. The wind carries every scent across the empty coastline, mixing them into an aroma that would forever remind you of home. Your new workplace stands alone. Not entirely alone, perhaps. The gulls consider themselves permanent residents. Several stubborn sheep wander nearby as if they own the cliffs. A colony of puffins argues loudly among the rocks during spring. But humans? There are remarkably few. Sometimes an entire week passes before another person appears. That sounds peaceful. It is. Mostly. But peaceful is different from easy. The lighthouse itself is not especially grand. Unlike castles or palaces, its beauty comes from purpose. Every stone was placed to survive storms. Every window faces the sea. Every step spirals upward toward the lantern room above. Everything exists for one simple reason. To keep strangers alive. Ships carrying timber. Fishing boats returning home. Steam packets carrying passengers. Merchant vessels loaded with tea, coffee, wool, spices, or barrels of flour. None of them know your name. Yet every captain hopes your light will be there when darkness arrives. That is quite a responsibility for someone whose nearest neighbor might live several miles away. Still, it is also wonderfully repetitive. And repetition is the closest friend of sleep. Your day begins before sunrise. Not because anyone tells you to. There is no supervisor standing outside your bedroom. No factory whistle. No alarm clock buzzing beside your bed. Instead, your schedule belongs to nature. The wind. The tides. The rising sun. After washing your face in cool water collected from yesterday's rain barrel, you dress slowly. Heavy wool socks. Sturdy leather boots. A thick shirt. Suspenders. Perhaps a wool sweater if autumn has begun creeping across the coast. Fashion is not especially important here. Warmth is. Breakfast is wonderfully uncomplicated. Fresh bread if you're lucky. Salted butter. Oatmeal. Tea. Sometimes eggs from the hens wandering behind the keeper's cottage. If fishing was good yesterday, perhaps smoked herring. No one complains about having the same breakfast every morning. There is no cafe nearby promising 14 varieties of caramel foam. Your menu is simple. Oddly enough, simple meals often taste better when eaten beside the sea. Once breakfast is finished, the real work quietly begins. People often imagine lighthouse keepers standing dramatically beside giant lamps while enormous storms rage outside every evening. Hollywood wa. Climbing the tower before sunset. As the afternoon slowly drifts toward evening, the world around your lighthouse begins to change in subtle ways. Not dramatically. History is often much quieter than that. The sunlight softens, losing the brilliant white glare of midday. Instead, warm golden light settles gently across the cliffs, making every patch of grass seem just a little brighter for a few precious moments. Far below, the sea appears calmer than before. Not because the waves have stopped. They never truly stop. Rather, they seem to breathe more slowly, as if the ocean itself has decided that rushing would accomplish very little. You find yourself agreeing. There is no reason to hurry. In fact, one of the first lessons every lighthouse keeper learns is that haste is usually the enemy of good work. A hurried sailor might tie a poor knot. A hurried carpenter might cut the wrong beam. And a hurried lighthouse keeper might forget something far more important. Perhaps a window left unlatched before a storm. Perhaps a lamp trimmed incorrectly. Perhaps a tiny smudge upon the great lens that could slightly weaken the beam. None of these mistakes seem particularly dramatic. Yet every small task matters. The lighthouse is a collection of little jobs performed faithfully, day after day, until together they become something much greater. The ships passing offshore will never know how many careful hands prepared tonight's light. Nor do they need to. The beam itself is enough. You leave the keeper's cottage carrying a small bundle of supplies. A polishing cloth. A pair of scissors specially kept for trimming the lamp wick. A small tin of tools. Perhaps a notebook tucked beneath your arm. The tower door is thick and heavy. It has spent decades resisting salt air, winter storms, and enthusiastic winds that would very much like to visit the interior. The hinges groan politely as you pull it open. Inside, the air feels noticeably cooler. Climbing the tower before sunset. As the afternoon slowly drifts toward evening, the world around your lighthouse begins to change in subtle ways. Not dramatically. History is often much quieter than that. The sunlight softens, losing the brilliant white glare of midday. Instead, warm golden light settles gently across the cliffs, making every patch of grass seem just a little brighter for a few precious moments. Far below, the sea appears calmer than before. Not because the waves have stopped. They never truly stop. Rather, they seem to breathe more slowly, as if the ocean itself has decided that rushing would accomplish very little. You find yourself agreeing. There is no reason to hurry. In fact, one of the first lessons every lighthouse keeper learns is that haste is usually the enemy of good work. A hurried sailor might tie a poor knot. A hurried carpenter might cut the wrong beam. And a hurried lighthouse keeper might forget something far more important. Perhaps a window left unlatched before a storm. Perhaps a lamp trimmed incorrectly. Perhaps a tiny smudge upon the great lens that could slightly weaken the beam. None of these mistakes seem particularly dramatic. Yet every small task matters. The lighthouse is a collection of little jobs performed faithfully, day after day, until together they become something much greater. The ships passing offshore will never know how many careful hands prepared tonight's light. Nor do they need to. The beam itself is enough. You leave the keeper's cottage carrying a small bundle of supplies. A polishing cloth. A pair of scissors specially kept for trimming the lamp wick. A small tin of tools. Perhaps a notebook tucked beneath your arm. The tower door is thick and heavy. It has spent decades resisting salt air, winter storms, and enthusiastic winds that would very much like to visit the interior. The hinges groan politely as you pull it open. Inside, the air feels noticeably cooler. If someone unfamiliar with science entered the room, they might assume the tower contains some ancient treasure. In a way, it does. The lens represents one of the greatest engineering achievements of its age. Without electricity, without computers, without modern manufacturing, craftsmen shaped hundreds of individual glass pieces with astonishing precision. Every section fits exactly where it belongs. Looking closely, you can almost imagine the countless hours spent grinding and polishing each surface. It is difficult not to admire such patience. The 19th century demanded patience from almost everyone. Waiting for letters. Waiting for ships. Waiting for harvests. Waiting for weather. Today we grow impatient when a web page takes 5 seconds to load. Our lighthouse keeper would likely find that rather amusing. Though, being polite, he probably wouldn't say so aloud. Now comes the evening inspection. Every routine follows nearly the same order. Predictable. Reliable. Comforting. You begin with the windows. A quick look for salt spray. Any streaks? Any fingerprints? Perhaps a determined gull left an unwelcome souvenir. It happens. The gull shows absolutely no remorse. Next comes the lens. You move slowly around it, cloth in hand. Gentle circles. Never pressing too hard. Never rushing. Dust disappears almost invisibly. The glass becomes so clear that it almost seems to vanish. That is exactly how it should look. A perfect lens is almost invisible until light passes through it. Now your attention turns toward the lamp itself. Before electricity, most lighthouses relied on carefully tended flames. Earlier generations burned candles. Some burned coal fires. By the middle of the 19th century, many stations used whale oil, while others gradually adopted cleaner burning vegetable oils or mineral oils as technology improved. Regardless of the fuel, one thing remained constant. The flame depended entirely upon the keeper. No flame. No light. No light. Very confused sailors. The lamp must never be taken for granted. You examine the fuel reservoir. Enough for the night? Good. You inspect the burner. Clean. No soot blocking the airflow. Excellent. Finally comes the wick. It must be trimmed with extraordinary care. Too short, and the flame grows weak. Too long, and smoke begins to build. Smoke means soot. Soot means dirty glass. Dirty glass means a weaker beam. It is remarkable how one tiny strip of woven cotton can influence ships many miles away. History often works exactly this way. Small actions. Large consequences. Outside, the sky begins changing color almost without permission. Blue softens into lavender. Lavender becomes pale orange. Clouds drift lazily across the western horizon. The first evening stars quietly appear. One. Then another. Soon there are too many to count. The sea reflects them imperfectly, breaking each tiny light into shimmering fragments. If you've never spent an evening beside an ocean before electric lights became common, it is difficult to imagine just how dark the world could become. Not gloomy. Simply honest. Night was allowed to be night. The stars answered accordingly. The sky became astonishing. The keeper notices these things. Not because he is unusually poetic. Because he has time. Time to watch. Time to notice. Time to appreciate ordinary moments that many people rush straight past. Soon, the moment arrives. Sunset. Not marked by a bell. Not announced by a clock. Simply observed. The last edge of the sun slips below the horizon. For just a few seconds, the entire sea glows with deep amber light. Then, it fades. The day's work is finished. The night's work begins. With practiced hands, you strike a flame. The wick catches slowly. A small yellow light flickers inside the burner. Nothing spectacular. Not yet. Then the great lens begins doing what it was designed to do. The modest little flame grows. Not larger. Brighter. The crystal rings gather every ray and send it outward in one powerful beam. Across dark water. Across lonely reefs. Across silent miles of open sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a sailor glances toward the coastline. He sees the familiar flash. He smiles quietly to himself. Home is still where he expected it to be. And high above the restless sea, in a tower built of stone, glass, and unwavering routine, one lighthouse keeper settles into another long, peaceful night of watching over strangers he will never meet. The night has only just begun. The long watch through the night. The lamp is burning now. Not roaring. Not blazing like a bonfire. Just quietly and faithfully glowing inside its polished lantern, exactly as it has every evening for countless nights before this one. Outside the glass, darkness has fully settled over the sea. The horizon has disappeared. Where only an hour ago you could distinguish the line between sky and water, there is now only a deep blanket of midnight blue. The stars have taken over the work of the setting sun, scattering themselves across the heavens with no apparent pattern except one that sailors somehow understand. From the lantern room, you watch the beam begin its endless journey. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. Again. And again. Every lighthouse has its own signature. Some shine steadily. Others flash every few seconds. Some show two quick flashes, followed by a pause. These patterns are no accident. Long before electronic navigation, sailors learned to recognize lighthouses by the rhythm of their light, much as one recognizes an old friend's voice without seeing their face. Somewhere beyond the darkness, a captain glances toward shore. He counts silently. 1, 2, 3. There it is, he says to no one in particular. We're exactly where we thought we were. It is difficult to overstate how comforting certainty can be on a dark ocean. The keeper will never hear those words. Yet they are spoken because of him. Contrary to what many people imagine, the keeper does not spend the entire night staring heroically out to sea. If he did, he would become astonishingly bored within the hour. Instead, the night unfolds as a series of gentle routines. Every so often, he checks the flame. A careful glance. Is it burning evenly? Is the wick producing too much smoke? Has the wind found some tiny gap where it ought not to be? Everything appears satisfactory. Excellent. There is no need to interfere. One of the greatest skills a lighthouse keeper develops is knowing when nothing needs to be done. Modern life often rewards constant activity. The 19th century lighthouse rewards quiet observation. Sometimes, the best work is simply making sure that good work continues. The silence inside the tower is unlike any silence found in ordinary homes. The thick stone walls soften the outside world. The wind becomes a low, distant murmur. The crashing surf transforms into a slow, comforting heartbeat. The iron framework surrounding the lantern expands ever so slightly from the warmth of the lamp, producing an occasional soft tick. Tick. Then several minutes pass. Another tick. It is not alarming. Quite the opposite. The tower seems almost alive, stretching gently as temperatures change. Old buildings have a language of their own. Wood creaks. Stone settles. Iron sighs. A lighthouse keeper eventually learns every sound. More importantly, he notices when a sound is missing, or when a new one appears. An unfamiliar noise deserves attention. A familiar one becomes part of the evening's music. Outside, the wind shifts. You notice it first by watching the beam. Not the light itself, but the faint mist drifting across it. Sea spray catches the lantern's glow, turning invisible moisture into shimmering silver threads. For just a few moments, the lighthouse seems to shine through floating clouds. Then the breeze changes again. The mist disappears. The ocean returns to darkness. Nature rarely stays exactly the same for long. Yet its changes happen so gradually that only patient observers truly appreciate them. Perhaps that is why lighthouse keepers become such careful watchers. There is little else to distract them. Around 9 o'clock, if the weather is calm, you leave the lantern room for a short inspection outside. A heavy wool coat is pulled over your shoulders. The tower door opens with a familiar groan. Cold sea air immediately greets you. It smells cleaner now than it did during the day. Cooler. Sharper. The moon hangs above the water like a polished silver coin. Its reflection stretches across the waves, forming what sailors often call a moon road. Of course, no one could walk upon it. Although, from this distance, it certainly looks inviting. The cliffs below are nearly invisible except where white foam marks the edge of each breaking wave. Far offshore, another light appears. Not a lighthouse. A ship. Its lantern bobs gently with the motion of the sea. Tiny. Steady. Comforting. You wonder who is aboard. Perhaps a family returning home after transporting lumber. Perhaps fishermen finishing a long voyage. Perhaps immigrants crossing unfamiliar waters toward entirely new lives. The keeper rarely knows. His duty is not to ask questions. His duty is simply to make sure they can find the coast safely. Returning inside, you close the heavy door against the wind. The warmth of the lantern room feels surprisingly welcoming. Not warm enough to remove your coat just yet. Stone towers are generous with drafts. You take a seat beside the logbook. Every lighthouse keeps one. It is not an exciting diary filled with daring adventures. Quite the opposite. A typical entry might read: weather calm. Wind light from the northwest. Lamp burning well. Lens cleaned before sunset. One merchant vessel observed to the southeast. That is all. No dramatic speeches. No mysterious strangers. No sea monsters. Just facts. Day after day. Year after year. Reading old logbooks today offers historians a remarkable glimpse into ordinary life. They reveal a profession built not on excitement, but on consistency. The remarkable thing is how reassuring that consistency becomes. Midnight approaches almost unnoticed. The moon climbs higher. The stars seem brighter than ever. The beam continues its endless sweep across the sea. Flash. Darkness. Flash. Darkness. It becomes almost hypnotic. Even the keeper occasionally finds himself standing quietly beside the window, following the rhythm without realizing it. His thoughts drift gently. Perhaps he remembers childhood. Perhaps he wonders whether tomorrow's supply boat will arrive. Perhaps he thinks about absolutely nothing at all. That, too, is a luxury. To sit quietly without urgent thoughts is something many people rarely experience. The lighthouse offers it almost every night. Of course, not every visitor is human. A small moth appears from somewhere within the tower. No one is quite certain how moths always manage to find lanterns. It circles the glass carefully. Once. Twice. Then settles on a nearby beam, apparently satisfied that the light will remain exactly where it is. A curious owl lands briefly upon the railing outside. It tilts its head toward the lantern, blinking thoughtfully. Perhaps it wonders why this peculiar artificial star has appeared upon the cliffs. Perhaps it simply enjoys the excellent view. Either way, after a few quiet moments, it disappears silently back into the darkness. The lighthouse resumes its peaceful solitude. Hours pass differently at sea. Without city noise, clocks become less important. Instead, you notice changes in the tide. The movement of stars. The cooling air. The slow fading of moonlight as clouds drift overhead. Time becomes something observed rather than measured. There is no rush toward morning. Morning will arrive precisely when it chooses. Until then, the keeper remains awake, not because the night demands constant action, but because quiet vigilance is itself a form of work. It is patient work. Invisible work. Often lonely work. Yet deeply meaningful. For somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, unseen sailors continue their journeys with greater confidence because one small light remains exactly where it should be. And high above the waves, inside a stone tower that has stood through countless winters, the keeper gently trims the wick once more, checks the crystal lens with practiced eyes, and listens as the sea whispers its timeless lullaby against the rocks below. The night is still young. There are many peaceful hours yet to keep watch. The keeper's midnight companion, weather, waves, and the quiet hours. The night has settled comfortably around the lighthouse. The lamp burns with a calm, unwavering glow. Its beam continues to sweep across the dark sea in its familiar rhythm, never rushing, never hesitating. Every revolution of the great lens is another silent promise to sailors far beyond the cliffs. Inside the tower, time seems to move differently. Not slower. Simply, more gently. The modern world often measures time by appointments, alarms, and deadlines. Here, during the middle years of the 19th century, a lighthouse keeper measures the hours by quieter things. The height of the moon. The sound of the tide. The cooling of the stones beneath his boots. The length of the lamp's wick. And perhaps, if he has lived here for many years, by the particular voice of the wind. Every wind has its own personality. A breeze arriving from the east carries the scent of open water. One from the west may arrive smelling faintly of pine forests, distant farms, or freshly turned earth. A northern wind is often crisp and dry, encouraging a keeper to pull his wool coat a little tighter around his shoulders. A southern breeze can be surprisingly gentle, almost warm, even after sunset. Experienced lighthouse keepers become excellent weather observers, not because they possess magical instincts, but because they pay attention every single day. The clouds become familiar acquaintances. The sea offers subtle hints. Even the birds occasionally reveal tomorrow's forecast better than any scientific instrument available at the time. If the gulls remain unusually close to shore, perhaps stronger winds are approaching. If the air suddenly feels strangely still, well, the ocean is often preparing a surprise. Fortunately, tonight offers no such excitement. Only calm water, a clear sky, and an endless collection of stars. The keeper pours himself another cup of tea. It is not particularly fancy. Certainly not flavored with vanilla, cinnamon, caramel, lavender, or anything else that would confuse his grandmother. Simply strong black tea. Perhaps sweetened with a small spoonful of sugar if supplies have arrived recently. Sugar remains something of a luxury. Milk, if available, depends entirely upon whether the lighthouse keeps a cow nearby or whether the last supply boat remembered to bring some. The kettle sits over a modest stove in the small room beneath the lantern. The warmth is welcome. Stone towers, despite their impressive appearance, have a remarkable talent for collecting cold air. Even during summer, the walls never quite lose their chill. The tea warms cold hands more effectively than the room itself. The first sip is always the best. The second is nearly as good. By the third, the keeper has settled comfortably into another quiet hour of watching. If you imagine lighthouse keeping as a lonely occupation, you would not be entirely wrong. Many keepers spent weeks with only occasional visitors. Some stations employed assistants or allowed families to live nearby. Others stood upon isolated islands where conversation was as rare as a perfectly calm winter sea. Yet loneliness and solitude are not exactly the same thing. Loneliness suggests the painful absence of company. Solitude, on the other hand, can become something almost peaceful. Many keepers discovered that after months, or even years, the silence no longer felt empty. Instead, it became familiar, predictable, comforting. The sea provided company in its own peculiar way. Its voice was always changing. Sometimes whispering. Sometimes laughing softly against the rocks. Occasionally raising its voice during a storm. But never truly falling silent. There is another companion as well. The logbook. Every few hours, the keeper opens its sturdy leather cover and records another brief observation. The handwriting is careful. There is little reason to rush. Ink rewards patience. A hurried pen leaves untidy marks. A patient one produces elegant lines that another keeper might read decades later. Tonight's entry is wonderfully ordinary. Wind moderate from the southwest. Sea calm. Visibility excellent. Lamp functioning normally. Perhaps another line follows. One brig observed passing eastward shortly after midnight. Nothing extraordinary. No dramatic rescues. No mysterious disappearances. And that is precisely how the keeper prefers it. Quiet nights mean safe nights. The most successful lighthouse is often the one whose story sounds almost boring. For everyone involved, boring is very good news. Outside, the tide has quietly begun its slow return. The waves climb slightly higher upon the rocks. Not enough to alarm anyone. Just enough to remind the coastline that nothing remains still forever. Each wave arrives with a familiar rhythm. Rush. Pause. Retreat. Rush. Pause. Retreat. If you listen carefully enough, you might almost imagine the sea breathing in its sleep. Perhaps that is why people have found oceans relaxing for thousands of years. The rhythm asks nothing of you. It simply continues. Steady. Patient. Endless. From time to time, the keeper steps outside onto the narrow gallery that circles the lantern room. The iron railing feels cool beneath his gloved hand. Above him stretches one of the clearest skies imaginable. In the 19th century, there are very few electric lights to compete with the stars. The Milky Way spills overhead like a pale ribbon of silver dust. Thousands upon thousands of stars shimmer across the heavens. Some are so faint they appear only when you stop looking directly at them. Astronomers call this using your peripheral vision. The keeper simply calls it looking carefully. He has become remarkably good at looking carefully. After all, his profession depends upon it. A meteor suddenly streaks across the sky. Bright. Silent. Gone. It lasts no longer than a heartbeat. The keeper smiles. Not because shooting stars are particularly rare. They are simply easier to notice when one spends so much time looking upward. Most people sleep through them. Others remain indoors. The lighthouse keeper enjoys a front row seat. If he were the sentimental sort, he might make a wish. Instead, he quietly returns to checking the lantern. Professional habits are difficult to abandon. Back inside, the flame requires only the smallest adjustment. A tiny twist of the wick. The light steadies immediately. That simple movement has been repeated thousands of times by keepers around the world. One careful hand. One quiet correction. One more hour of dependable light. It is remarkable how many important jobs throughout history consisted of ordinary people performing ordinary tasks with extraordinary consistency. A lighthouse keeper rarely becomes famous. There are no cheering crowds. No medals presented beneath grand chandeliers. No newspaper headlines announcing. Local keeper successfully maintains lamp for another entire night. And yet, every ship that reaches harbor safely carries a story that includes him, even if no one speaks his name. History often remembers kings, admirals, and inventors. It quietly depends upon people like lighthouse keepers. As the night deepens, the temperature continues to fall. Tiny droplets of moisture begin forming upon the outside of the lantern glass. The keeper notices immediately. Not because it causes concern. Only because noticing small changes has become second nature. He wipes away the beginnings of condensation with slow, practiced movements. Another tiny task completed. Another tiny improvement made. One could almost build an entire life from such moments. Perhaps that is exactly what he has done. Somewhere below, hidden among the rocks, a colony of seabirds stirs briefly before settling once more. Farther offshore, a seal surfaces for a quiet breath before disappearing beneath the dark water. The lighthouse shines on. The stars remain above. The waves continue their patient conversation with the shore. Within the tower, the keeper closes his logbook, warms his hands around the last of his tea, and listens to the comforting chorus that has become the soundtrack of his life. The soft hiss of the lamp. The distant sigh of the sea. The occasional creak of ancient timber. And the gentle ticking of cooling iron. Together, they create a kind of music that no orchestra could ever reproduce. It is simple. Steady. Unhurried. Exactly the sort of music that has lulled countless lighthouse keepers through peaceful nights for generations. As another quiet hour slips by, the beam continues its faithful journey across the sleeping sea, while the tower itself stands as patiently as ever, waiting, watching, and quietly guiding strangers home until the first hint of dawn begins to gather beyond the eastern horizon. When the supply boat finally arrives. If you were to ask someone what the greatest challenge of being a lighthouse keeper in the 1800s might have been, they would probably answer without hesitation. The storms. It is an understandable guess. Storms make for dramatic paintings, exciting novels, and impressive stories told around fireplaces. But storms, surprisingly, were not the keeper's constant companion. Most nights were exactly like the one we've been enjoying together. Calm. Predictable. Almost wonderfully uneventful. The challenge that quietly shaped a keeper's life was something much less dramatic. Waiting. Waiting for letters. Waiting for fresh food. Waiting for repairs. And above all, waiting for the supply boat. The lighthouse could not produce everything it needed. Oil for the lamp had to come from somewhere. Fresh flour did not magically appear in the pantry. Neither did tea, coffee, soap, candles, writing paper, or replacement wicks. Every few weeks, sometimes once a month, depending on weather and location, a small boat appeared on the horizon carrying everything the station required. The keeper rarely knew exactly which day it would arrive. There were no telephones. No telegram announcing. Delivery expected Tuesday between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. The sea had its own schedule. The boat would come when wind, tide, and weather allowed. Until then, the keeper waited. Fortunately, waiting was something he had become exceptionally good at. Several days before supplies began running low, the keeper usually took inventory. It was a careful process. Nothing was wasted. He opened cupboards built into thick stone walls. Glass jars lined sturdy wooden shelves. One contained oatmeal. Another dried peas. A third held coarse salt. Nearby rested sacks of flour folded neatly shut with twine. Tin containers protected tea leaves from damp sea air. Everything had its place. Order mattered. Not because someone was coming to inspect the pantry. Because when the nearest store was many miles away, losing track of supplies was simply poor planning. The keeper counted carefully. 1 sack of flour. Half a barrel of oats. Enough lamp oil for perhaps another fortnight. Tea. Still plenty. That was comforting. Tea had an extraordinary ability to improve almost any situation. Cold weather. Drink tea. Rain. Drink tea. A long night. Drink tea. Unexpected visitors. Offer them tea. The British, of course, would hardly be surprised by this strategy. The pantry also contained foods that modern kitchens rarely see. Hardtack biscuits, for example. If you have never encountered hardtack, imagine a biscuit with all the softness carefully removed. Then remove just a little more. Hardtack was famously durable. It could remain edible for months, sometimes years, provided it stayed dry. It was not particularly exciting. But exciting food was never its purpose. Its purpose was survival. Many sailors joked that hardtack could survive longer than the people eating it. The biscuits themselves would probably have appreciated the compliment. Smoked fish hung from wooden beams. Salted pork rested inside barrels. Perhaps there were dried apples tucked away for winter. If fortune smiled, the keeper's small vegetable garden had produced potatoes, onions, carrots, or cabbage. Simple foods. Wholesome foods. Meals built for hard work rather than fashionable dining. Dinner might consist of fish chowder thickened with potatoes. Fresh bread if flour was plentiful. Butter if the weather had remained cool enough. Perhaps a slice of cheese. Nothing extravagant. Yet after spending hours climbing lighthouse stairs, even the simplest meal could feel wonderfully satisfying. One quiet morning, just after sunrise, something catches the keeper's attention. Not the beam. Not the weather. Movement. Far out upon the water. A tiny dark shape appears where sea meets sky. He narrows his eyes. Could it be? Perhaps. Too early to know for certain. The shape grows ever so slightly larger. A mast becomes visible. Then a sail. Then another. Finally, there is no doubt. The supply boat has arrived. No bells ring. No cheering crowds gather upon the cliffs. The keeper simply smiles. After weeks of familiar routines, another human being is coming to visit. The boat approaches cautiously. The captain knows these waters well. Hidden rocks guard the coastline like silent sentries. Even in calm weather, care is essential. The lighthouse has guided countless vessels safely through the night. Now, in broad daylight, the keeper watches another careful arrival. The small boat rocks gently as it reaches the landing. A rope is thrown ashore. The keeper catches it neatly. "Morning," calls the captain. "Morning," the keeper replies. The conversation begins with weather. It almost always begins with weather. In the 19th century, discussing the weather was not merely polite conversation. It was practical information. The captain reports calm seas during the crossing. The keeper mentions a light fog that appeared briefly 2 mornings ago. Each man quietly stores away the other's observations. Then comes the unloading. Barrels first. Heavy. Awkward. Rolled carefully rather than carried whenever possible. Next come wooden crates. One contains lamp oil. Another holds flour. Another perhaps includes nails, spare hinges, or replacement tools requested months earlier. A sack of coal. Fresh candles. Bundles of clean wicks. Soap wrapped carefully in paper. A few newspapers, already several weeks old by the time they reach the lighthouse. It hardly matters. News travels at the speed of ships. No one expects yesterday's headlines. The keeper accepts them gratefully anyway. History can wait a few extra days. Then come the letters. Perhaps only 2. Perhaps none. Sometimes one arrives from a brother working in another county. Sometimes from a sister describing the birth of her newest child. Perhaps from an old friend who now lives in London and cannot quite imagine spending months beside the sea. The keeper thanks the captain quietly. Letters were precious. Ink carried voices across remarkable distances. Reading one often became the highlight of an entire month. He does not open them immediately. There will be time for that this evening. Some pleasures deserve patience. The captain remains only a short while. There are other villages to visit. Other deliveries to make. The tide waits for no one. Before departing, the 2 men stand together overlooking the sea. They speak about ordinary things. A merchant vessel seen last week. A family moving inland. Repairs needed at another lighthouse farther up the coast. Nothing particularly memorable. Yet after weeks of solitude, even simple conversation feels unexpectedly pleasant. The voices seem almost loud against the usual silence. Soon, Ropes are untied. The sail catches the wind once more. Slowly, the little boat moves away from the rocks. The captain raises a hand in farewell. The keeper returns the gesture. Within minutes, the vessel becomes smaller and smaller until it is once again nothing more than a dark shape upon the bright water. Then, even that disappears beyond the horizon. The silence returns. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like an old friend quietly taking his familiar seat once again. The afternoon is spent organizing the new supplies. Every barrel is placed exactly where it belongs. Fresh oil is carefully transferred into storage containers. The pantry shelves look comfortably full once again. There is something deeply satisfying about order restored. The keeper closes the cupboard doors with quiet confidence. The lighthouse is ready for many more weeks. Many more sunsets. Many more peaceful nights. As evening approaches, he finally sits beside the window with a cup of tea and the unopened letters resting upon the table. Outside, the sea glows beneath the lowering sun. The gulls will lazily above the cliffs. The familiar routine of lighting the lamp will begin again soon. But for just a few minutes, before duty calls him back to the tower, the keeper unfolds a carefully written letter, smiles at the familiar handwriting, and allows the voices of distant family and old friends to briefly fill the quiet little cottage. Then, as the shadows lengthen across the coastline, he folds the letter neatly, places it safely inside a wooden drawer, stands, picks up the oil can and his polishing cloth, and begins climbing the spiral staircase once again. For another peaceful night awaits above the sea, and somewhere beyond the darkening horizon, strangers are already depending on a light they may never stop to think about, but one that has never failed to think about them. A morning of mist and the gentle art of waiting. By the time the supply boat has disappeared beyond the horizon, evening has come and gone once more. The lighthouse has completed another peaceful night of guiding unseen sailors through the darkness. Now, without fanfare, another day quietly begins. The keeper is already awake before the first hint of dawn reaches the eastern sky. Not because he has slept poorly. Quite the opposite. After years of living beside the steady rhythm of the sea, his body has learned to wake gently, almost as naturally as the tide itself. There is no clock chiming beside his bed. No alarm sounding from across the room. Only habit. And perhaps the distant murmur of waves meeting stone. The cottage is cool. A faint orange glow still lingers inside the cast-iron stove from the fire that burned through much of the night. The keeper adds another small piece of wood. The flames respond lazily. They have no interest in hurrying either. Soon the kettle is resting above the fire. Fresh water, collected from yesterday's rain barrel, begins its slow journey toward boiling. Rainwater is precious here. Many isolated lighthouses have no natural spring nearby. Every shower becomes something of a gift. Large wooden barrels stand beneath the cottage roof, patiently collecting every drop. The keeper has learned to appreciate rainy days almost as much as sunny ones. Rain fills the barrels. Sun dries the washing. Both have their place. Breakfast is as dependable as the sunrise. A thick slice of yesterday's bread. A little butter. Perhaps a spoonful of blackberry preserves made late last summer. The berries grew wild along the cliff paths, protected from strong winds by clusters of hardy shrubs. Gathering them had taken an entire afternoon. Making the preserves had taken another. Enjoying them requires only a single bite. Some rewards are worth waiting for. The tea is hot now. Steam curls upward in slow, graceful ribbons. Outside the cottage window, the world is beginning to brighten. Or at least, it should be. Instead of sunrise, there is mist. A soft, silver-gray mist has quietly rolled in from the sea during the final hours of darkness. It wraps itself around the cliffs like an enormous wool blanket. The lighthouse is still there, of course. The keeper knows exactly where it stands. Yet from the cottage door, only the lower portion of the tower is visible. Everything above seems to disappear into the clouds. The lantern room has become a ghost. The beam that shone so brightly during the night is gone now, hidden somewhere inside the fog. It is a curious sight. The lighthouse seems taller than ever because its top has vanished from view. Children visiting such a place might imagine the tower stretching all the way into the heavens. The keeper smiles softly. He has seen mornings like this hundreds of times. They never lose their quiet beauty. Mist changes everything. Sounds become softer. Closer somehow. The cry of a gull echoes strangely, as though the bird were flying inside an enormous cathedral. The crashing waves below no longer seem distant. Instead, they appear just beyond the edge of the fog. Invisible. Yet unmistakably present. The keeper pauses for a moment outside the cottage. He breathes deeply. The air smells different today. Cooler. Damp. Filled with the clean scent of salt water and wet stone. Tiny droplets gather upon his beard and the brim of his hat before he has taken 10 steps. It feels less like walking through rain and more like strolling inside a very quiet cloud. The climb to the lantern room feels different as well. The spiral staircase is familiar beneath his boots. Stone. Iron. Wood. Nothing has changed. Yet the light filtering through the narrow windows has become soft and silvery. No sharp shadows. No bright sunshine. Only gentle gray light filling every corner of the tower. Halfway up, the keeper stops beside one of the small windows. Normally he could see miles across the sea. Today. Perhaps 50 yards. Beyond that lies only white. The ocean has politely hidden itself for the morning. At the top of the tower, he opens the lantern room carefully. The great glass panels are covered with tiny beads of moisture. Thousands upon thousands of droplets cling to the outside surface. Each one catches the faint morning light. Together they sparkle like countless little pearls. Cleaning the glass cannot begin immediately. The outside remains too wet. Instead, the keeper inspects everything inside. The great lens, which only hours ago transformed a modest flame into a brilliant beacon, now rests quietly in the soft gray light. Without the lamp burning, it seems almost delicate. Almost fragile. In truth, it is remarkably sturdy. But appearances can be wonderfully deceptive. The lamp itself has cooled. Its metal burner is still faintly warm from the long night. The keeper begins the familiar morning routine. He carefully removes the burner. The remaining oil is measured. Nothing is wasted. Oil is expensive, difficult to transport, and absolutely essential. Every drop deserves respect. He trims the wick ever so slightly. Last night's flame has left behind a thin edge of blackened fabric. With one careful snip, the wick is ready for another evening. Small tasks. Repeated every day. Performed with the same quiet precision. People often imagine history being shaped by great battles or famous speeches. Sometimes it is. But just as often, history depends upon someone remembering to trim a lamp wick before sunset. Next comes the polishing. The brass fittings surrounding the lamp have lost just a little of yesterday's shine. Salt air has a remarkable ability to settle upon everything. Brass, iron, glass, even polished wood. The keeper reaches for his soft cloth. He rubs each surface in slow circles. There is no hurry. The cloth glides across warm golden metal until the dull finish gradually disappears. Soon the brass begins reflecting tiny patches of gray morning light. Another few minutes. Another careful pass. Now it gleams once again. The keeper nods with quiet satisfaction. No applause is necessary. The work speaks for itself. By late morning, the mist has begun to lift. Not all at once. It rises almost reluctantly, drifting away in delicate ribbons that reveal little pieces of coastline one at a time. First, the nearest rocks appear. Dark. Wet. Covered with seaweed glistening like polished emeralds. Then the narrow footpath leading toward the cottage. A few minutes later, the grassy cliffs emerge. Finally, the distant horizon slowly returns, separating sky from sea once more. The world has quietly reassembled itself. Nothing has changed. Only your ability to see it. With the fog gone, life resumes its familiar rhythm. The gulls become noticeably louder, as though making up for the quiet morning. One particularly confident bird lands upon the railing outside the lantern room. It looks directly through the glass at the keeper. The keeper looks back. Neither says a word. The gull tilts its head. Perhaps it is inspecting the quality of the polishing. Perhaps it simply hopes for a forgotten crumb from breakfast. Finding neither, it gives one indignant squawk before launching itself back into the sea breeze. The keeper cannot help smiling. Even after years beside the coast, gulls remain wonderfully predictable. They possess enormous confidence and surprisingly little embarrassment. The afternoon passes much as it always does. A few repairs to the garden fence. Sweeping the cottage floor. Sharpening a kitchen knife upon a whetstone. Folding freshly dried laundry still scented with sunshine and sea air. Simple tasks. Ordinary tasks. The sort of work that rarely appears in history books but quietly filled the lives of countless people. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western sea, the keeper climbs the spiral staircase once again, carrying fresh oil, a clean cloth, and the calm assurance that comes from another well-spent day. The mist has long since disappeared. The horizon is clear. The lens is spotless. The lamp is prepared. And somewhere beyond the bright afternoon sky, another peaceful evening is patiently waiting for its faithful keeper to light the way once more. The gentle company of seabirds and other quiet neighbors. By now, you have probably begun to notice something rather unusual about life at the lighthouse. For a place that seems so wonderfully isolated, it is never truly empty. People are rare. Visitors are even rarer. Yet the cliffs are full of life. Not the noisy bustle of a marketplace or the endless movement of a busy harbor. Instead, this is the quiet society of the coast, a world of seabirds, wildflowers, curious seals, patient sheep, and countless small creatures that have made these windswept rocks their home for centuries. For the lighthouse keeper, they become familiar neighbors. Perhaps even friends. Not the sort who borrow your tools or stay for tea. The quieter sort. The ones who simply share the landscape. The first voices of the morning almost always belong to the gulls. Long before the sun has climbed high above the sea, their calls echo across the cliffs. Some people find the sound rather harsh. The keeper hardly notices anymore. After years beside the ocean, the cries have become part of the day's natural rhythm. In fact, an unusually quiet morning often feels stranger than a noisy one. The gulls gather on the rocks below, arguing passionately over matters that only gulls can truly understand. Perhaps someone has discovered a particularly interesting crab. Perhaps one bird has wandered into another's favorite nesting place. Or perhaps they simply enjoy a spirited discussion before breakfast. Whatever the reason, they seem entirely committed to it. The keeper smiles to himself. If gulls ever formed a parliament, it would almost certainly last all day. Not every seabird is quite so enthusiastic. Farther along the cliffs, where the rocks slope gently toward the water, another visitor makes its appearance each spring. The puffin. Unlike the rather outspoken gull, the puffin seems almost shy. Its black and white feathers resemble a formal evening coat, while its bright beak looks as though someone carefully painted it with cheerful colors. Watching a puffin land is a surprisingly entertaining experience. Flying. Quite graceful. Landing. Less so. Many arrive with admirable confidence before discovering, rather suddenly, that stopping requires considerably more planning than expected. The result is often a gentle tumble onto the grass. The puffin seems entirely unembarrassed. It simply stands up, looks around as if everything happened exactly according to plan, and waddles away with remarkable dignity. The keeper has witnessed this little performance many times. It never fails to bring a quiet smile. The cliffs themselves provide homes for hundreds of nesting birds. Tiny ledges, invisible from below, become bustling neighborhoods during the warmer months. Each spring, the air fills with the flutter of wings. Parents return carrying small fish in their beaks. Young chicks peer nervously over rocky edges, wondering whether flying is truly as straightforward as their parents make it appear. Eventually, curiosity wins. One brave leap. A few uncertain wing beats. Then another young bird joins the endless dance above the sea. The keeper often pauses during his daily chores simply to watch. There is no urgency. Nature has no schedule to keep except its own. Of course, birds are not the only regular visitors. On particularly calm afternoons, seals sometimes appear near the rocks below the lighthouse. Only their round heads remain above the water. From a distance, they resemble smooth gray stones that have somehow learned to blink. One lifts its whiskered face toward the tower. Another rolls lazily onto its back before disappearing beneath the waves without so much as a splash. The keeper has often wondered whether they recognize him. Perhaps they do. Animals become surprisingly observant when the same person appears day after day. To the seals, the keeper is likely just another dependable feature of the coastline. As familiar as the cliffs. As steady as the tide. Life on land moves just as gently. A narrow path winds across the grassy headland toward the keeper's cottage. Along its edges grow sturdy wildflowers perfectly suited to the salty air. Sea thrift forms soft pink cushions among the rocks. Small white daisies sway in the breeze. Purple heather spreads across the hillsides in late summer, painting entire stretches of coastline with delicate color. The flowers ask for very little. A little rain. A little sunshine. A little patience. The sea wind takes care of the rest. The keeper often notices the changing seasons first through these tiny blossoms rather than through the calendar hanging inside the cottage. Nature keeps excellent records. Nearby, a small flock of sheep spends its days grazing peacefully. No one seems entirely certain who owns every sheep. Some belong to neighboring farmers. Others appear to believe they own themselves. The sheep wander wherever the grass looks most appealing, paying little attention to fences unless absolutely necessary. Occasionally one decides that the lighthouse grounds contain especially delicious grass. The keeper gently encourages it back toward the hillside. The sheep usually cooperates. Eventually. There is little point arguing with a sheep. It possesses extraordinary confidence despite very limited evidence. One afternoon, while repairing a loose section of fence, the keeper notices a small rabbit sitting quietly nearby. It does not run. Instead, it watches with cautious curiosity. The keeper continues hammering. Tap. 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 The rabbit twitches one ear. Another nail. Another gentle tap. Satisfied that the human presents no immediate danger, the rabbit calmly resumes nibbling clover. It is a strangely peaceful moment. Two neighbors quietly tending to their own work. Neither disturbing the other. Even the insects seem to understand the unhurried pace of lighthouse life. Honeybees drift lazily among the wildflowers, collecting nectar beneath the warm afternoon sun. Butterflies float across the meadows as though they have nowhere in particular to be. Dragonflies patrol the edges of small rain-filled pools after summer showers. Everything moves with quiet purpose. Nothing appears rushed. It is difficult to feel anxious while watching a butterfly wander wherever the breeze chooses to carry it. The keeper has learned this lesson well. As evening approaches, the cliffs begin to change once again. The daytime birds gradually settle. The gulls become less argumentative. The puffins disappear toward their nesting burrows. Shadows lengthen across the grass. A cool breeze returns from the sea. Then, almost unnoticed, the night shift arrives. An owl glides silently across the hillside. Its wings make almost no sound. Far below, somewhere among the rocks, a fox begins its evening patrol. The keeper catches only a brief glimpse of its russet coat before it melts back into the gathering darkness. The lighthouse is never truly asleep. Its residents simply change with the hour. Inside the cottage, supper is simple. A bowl of vegetable stew. Fresh bread baked that morning. A wedge of cheese. Perhaps one of the preserved blackberries from last summer for dessert. The keeper eats beside the open window. Outside, the sea continues its endless conversation with the shore. The evening breeze carries the scent of salt, heather, and freshly cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a lone gull gives one final call before settling for the night. The silence that follows is not empty. It is comfortably full. Full of gentle sounds. Full of familiar companions. Full of the quiet assurance that tomorrow morning the gulls will argue once again, the sheep will wander exactly where they should not, the seals may appear with their curious eyes above the waves, and the wildflowers will continue blooming without ever asking for recognition. As the sun slips below the western horizon, the keeper finishes the last sip of his tea, gathers the polished oil can, folds his cleaning cloth over one arm, and begins climbing the winding staircase toward the lantern room. Above him waits the great crystal lens. Beyond it lies the open sea. And all around him, in the fading twilight, his quiet neighbors settle into another peaceful night beside the lonely lighthouse that has become home to them all. Winter comes to the lonely coast. By the time autumn quietly slips away, the lighthouse has already begun preparing for winter. Not deliberately. Simply naturally. The sea changes first. Its deep blue summer color gradually becomes darker, almost steel gray beneath the lowering skies. The breeze grows cooler. The daylight becomes a little shorter each afternoon. The sunsets arrive earlier than expected, as though the sun has grown slightly impatient to finish its work. The keeper notices these changes long before the calendar tells him that winter is near. He rarely needs a date. Nature keeps excellent time. The first truly cold morning arrives almost unnoticed. The keeper opens the cottage door and pauses. The world feels different. Not because of snow. There is none. Not yet. Instead, the air itself has changed. It carries a crisp sharpness that gently reddens the cheeks and fills the lungs with clean, icy freshness. Each breath becomes visible for a moment before disappearing into the still morning. Tiny crystals of frost cover the grass surrounding the lighthouse. Every blade sparkles in the first rays of dawn. The cliffs appear dusted with silver. Even the wooden fence surrounding the vegetable garden seems decorated with delicate white lace. Nature has been busy during the night. Inside the cottage, the fire becomes the center of daily life. During summer, the stove was useful. Now it is essential. The keeper kneels beside the hearth with practiced movements. Small pieces of kindling first. Then slightly larger branches. Finally, thicker logs collected and carefully dried during warmer months. One match. A gentle flame. Soon the familiar crackling sound fills the little room. There are few sounds more comforting than a fire on a cold morning. The slow pop of burning wood. The quiet sigh as another log settles. The gentle warmth spreading steadily through the cottage. The keeper stretches his hands toward the fire. Not too close. Just enough to chase away the morning chill. The kettle soon follows. Tea tastes particularly satisfying in winter. Perhaps because the cold reminds us to appreciate warmth. Winter requires more planning than any other season. During summer, one can always spend another hour outdoors. Gather another basket of berries. Repair another fence. Dry another load of washing. Winter is less forgiving. Every task asks a simple question. Did you prepare in advance? The keeper quietly answers yes. Months ago, he stacked firewood beneath a covered shed. He repaired loose roof shingles before the autumn rains. He filled every oil barrel while deliveries remained reliable. The pantry shelves stand comfortably full. Flour. Oats. Tea. Dried beans. Salted fish. Smoked meat. Enough to last many weeks should rough seas delay the next supply boat. Preparation, after all, is simply another form of peace of mind. Outside, the garden has settled into its winter sleep. The blackberry bushes stand bare. The herbs have disappeared beneath the soil, waiting patiently for spring. Only the sturdy cabbage seems determined to continue growing despite the cold. The sheep, wrapped in their thick wool, appear entirely unconcerned. They continue grazing exactly as before. If sheep possess opinions about winter, they keep them to themselves. The gulls, meanwhile, remain just as enthusiastic. Cold weather has done absolutely nothing to reduce their confidence. They still patrol the cliffs with great importance. They still argue over imaginary matters. Some traditions survive every season. As afternoon fades, dark clouds begin gathering far out over the sea. Not threatening. Simply heavy. The sort of clouds that seem content to drift slowly across the horizon all day before finally deciding to release a gentle shower. The keeper notices them while cleaning the lantern room. He has become an expert observer without ever thinking of himself as one. A slight change in the wind. A different smell carried inland from the water. The color of distant clouds. Each detail quietly contributes to tomorrow's forecast. There are no weather broadcasts. No radio reports. Only careful observation. Fortunately, careful observation has become second nature. Before sunset, the keeper performs his familiar routine once more. The great Fresnel lens gleams beneath the fading daylight. Every polished glass panel reflects the orange sky outside. The brass fittings shine warmly. The lamp is filled. The wick has been trimmed with patient precision. Everything waits quietly for darkness. The routine never grows tiresome. Quite the opposite. There is comfort in repetition. Many years later, the keeper might forget what happened on an ordinary Tuesday in October. But his hands would still remember exactly how to prepare the evening lamp. Some habits become woven into the body itself. The first rain arrives just after dusk. Not heavy. Just a soft tapping against the lantern glass. Tiny droplets slide downward in slow winding paths before disappearing into the darkness below. The sound is almost musical. Tap. 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 The lighthouse beam shines through the rain without complaint. Each rotation briefly illuminates millions of tiny raindrops suspended in the air. For one magical second, the beam appears almost solid, like a glowing pathway stretching into the night. Then the light moves on. Darkness returns. Another sweep. Another glowing curtain of rain. Again and again. Inside the tower, everything feels calm. The thick stone walls shield the keeper from the worst of the weather. He sits beside the logbook. The nib of his pen scratches softly across the paper. Wind moderate from the west. Light rain after sunset. Visibility fair. Lamp burning steadily. He pauses. Blows gently upon the ink. Closes the book. Some future keeper may one day read these pages. Perhaps decades from now. Perhaps after this keeper has long since retired. The words are simple. Yet together they tell the quiet history of countless ordinary evenings. History is often built from moments exactly like this. Later that night, the rain gives way to silence once again. Clouds slowly drift apart. One by one, the stars begin returning to the sky. The moon emerges from behind the last patch of gray, bathing the wet cliffs in silver light. Every stone glistens. Every puddle reflects the heavens above. The lighthouse beam sweeps silently across the sleeping sea. Far below, the waves continue their endless conversation with the shore. Steady. Patient. Unhurried. The keeper steps onto the narrow gallery outside the lantern room. His heavy wool coat shields him from the cold. The air is wonderfully fresh after the rain. He breathes deeply. The smell of salt, damp earth, and clean stone fills the night. It is the scent of winter arriving. Not with great fanfare. Not with fierce storms. Simply with quiet confidence. He remains there for several peaceful minutes, listening. No wagons. No factories. No distant engines. Only the timeless sounds that have echoed along this coastline for centuries. The whisper of the retreating tide. The gentle rustle of wind through dry grasses. The occasional sleepy cry of a seabird tucked safely among the cliffs. Above him, thousands of stars shimmer in the clear winter sky, brighter now than they seemed during the warm months of summer. The cold air has polished the heavens. The keeper smiles softly. Tomorrow will almost certainly resemble today. Another fire to light. Another kettle to boil. Another staircase to climb. Another lamp to tend. And somehow, in that beautiful sameness, he has discovered something many people spend an entire lifetime searching for. A life measured not by excitement, but by quiet purpose. As the beam circles once more across the dark Atlantic, the lonely lighthouse stands exactly where it has always stood, patiently greeting another winter night, one calm hour at a time. The Lighthouse Logbook, recording the ordinary days. Long before cameras became common. Long before weather satellites circled the Earth. Long before ships could send messages through invisible radio waves. There was a book. It did not look particularly impressive. Its leather cover had faded after years of careful use. The corners were rounded. The pages had grown slightly yellow from countless seasons of sea air. When opened, it released the faint scent of ink, paper, and old leather. To almost everyone else, it would appear to be an ordinary notebook. To the lighthouse keeper, it was one of the most important objects in the tower. This was the logbook. Every day began and ended within its pages. Nothing was considered too ordinary to record. Quite the opposite. The ordinary things mattered most. The weather. The condition of the lamp. The direction of the wind. The arrival of a passing ship. The delivery of supplies. The changing tide. The keeper knew something many people forget. Great events are built from thousands of ordinary days. If those ordinary days are never recorded, history quietly disappears. Early each morning, after extinguishing the lamp and completing his first inspection of the lantern room, the keeper climbed down to the small writing desk tucked neatly inside the tower. The desk was simple. Made from sturdy oak. Its surface carried tiny scratches earned over many years. A small bottle of black ink rested in one corner. Beside it lay several carefully sharpened quill pens. Later in the century, many keepers would use steel nibs. But for now, the familiar feather quill still performed its duty admirably. The keeper selected the pen almost automatically. He had used it so often that it felt like an extension of his own hand. Writing in the 19th century required patience. There was no keyboard. No convenient delete key. Certainly no spell checker politely suggesting improvements. Every letter demanded attention. The quill dipped gently into the ink. Not too deeply. Too much ink would create an untidy blot upon the page. Too little would produce faded writing. Years of practice had taught the keeper exactly how much was needed. He placed the tip against the paper. For a moment, everything became still. Then, the scratching sound began. Soft. Steady. Comforting. Almost like the whisper of dry grass moving in a gentle breeze. Today's entry might read. January 14, 1858. Weather calm before sunrise. Light fog dispersed by mid-morning. Lantern cleaned thoroughly. Wick replaced. One fishing vessel observed returning eastward shortly after noon. No unusual occurrences. The final sentence appeared surprisingly often. No unusual occurrences. To an adventurous novelist, those words might sound disappointing. To a lighthouse keeper, they were deeply satisfying. Nothing unusual meant the lamp had done its work. Ships had passed safely. The tower remained secure. The sea had behaved itself. It had been, in every possible way, a successful day. Occasionally, however, the logbook became slightly more interesting. Perhaps a pod of dolphins followed a merchant ship for several miles. Perhaps an unusually bright comet appeared above the sea. Perhaps the first snowfall of winter dusted the cliffs. These small moments found their place upon the page. Never exaggerated. Never decorated with unnecessary language. Simply observed. The keeper was not writing poetry. He was preserving facts. Yet somehow, those simple facts possess a quiet beauty all their own. One afternoon, while organizing older records, the keeper opened a logbook written by the man who had tended the lighthouse nearly 20 years earlier. The handwriting differed slightly. A little narrower. Perhaps more hurried. Yet the routine remained wonderfully familiar. Strong winds from the northwest. Heavy rain. Lamp burning brightly. Supply vessel delayed. Reading those entries felt strangely comforting. The previous keeper had climbed these same stairs. Polished the same brass. Watched the same waves. Perhaps he had stood exactly where the current keeper now stood, gazing through the same windows toward the same endless sea. The lighthouse changed very little. Only the people quietly passing through it. History often celebrates remarkable individuals. Kings. Explorers. Inventors. Generals. Their names appear in large books. Statues. Portraits. School lessons. The lighthouse keeper rarely receives such attention. His handwriting survives instead. Small lines of ink quietly preserving ordinary mornings that would otherwise have been forgotten. There is something rather touching about that. A stranger living centuries later may never know the keeper's face. But they can recognize his careful penmanship immediately. Every neatly formed letter reflects the personality of the hand that wrote it. Steady. Patient. Dependable. Much like the keeper himself. Sometimes the weather interrupted the writing. A sudden gust of wind might rattle the tower windows. The keeper would pause. Listen carefully. Then continue. There was never any need to hurry. Ink dries at its own pace. So does history. The pages accepted each new sentence without complaint. Year after year, volume after volume, shelf after shelf. Eventually, dozens of completed logbooks rested inside a sturdy wooden cabinet. Together they formed a quiet diary of the sea. Not written from the deck of magnificent warships. Not composed by famous admirals. But by someone who simply watched. Every day. Every season. Every year. During particularly quiet afternoons, the keeper occasionally enjoyed reading entries from many years before. He smiled when discovering familiar patterns. The same winter storms returning. The same migrating birds appearing each spring. The same notes reminding future keepers to repair a loose gate or inspect a cracked window before colder weather arrived. In a way, the logbook allowed each generation of keepers to speak with the next. One careful sentence at a time. Oil supplies running lower than expected. The southern stair rail requires attention. A family of swallows has nested beneath the eaves again. Nothing extraordinary. Yet deeply human. Tiny messages quietly crossing decades. As evening approaches, sunlight enters the writing room through a small western window. The golden light stretches across the open pages, making the fresh ink shine briefly before it dries. Outside, the sea glitters beneath the lowering sun. A pair of gulls circles lazily above the cliffs. Somewhere far offshore, the faint outline of a sailing ship moves patiently toward the horizon. The keeper gently closes the logbook. The leather cover settles with a soft thump. Another ordinary day has found its place in history. He returns the book to its familiar shelf. Straight. Level. Ready for tomorrow. Soon, it is time to climb the spiral staircase once more. The polished brass lamp waits quietly inside the lantern room. The great crystal lens catches the final rays of daylight. Everything is exactly as it should be. The keeper fills the reservoir with fresh oil, inspects the wick one final time, and glances toward the western sky, where the last traces of orange slowly melt into deep shades of violet. Below, the waves continue their endless conversation with the rocks. Above, the first evening star quietly appears. The lighthouse prepares for another night of faithful service. And inside its weathered stone walls, one more page has been written, not about grand adventures or famous battles, but about something far rarer and perhaps even more valuable. A life lived with steady hands, careful eyes, and the quiet understanding that even the most ordinary day is worthy of being remembered. The slow rhythm of the seasons. If someone were to ask the lighthouse keeper what day it was, he would almost certainly know. If they asked the date, he could easily look in his logbook. But if they asked him what truly marked the passing of time, he might answer in a very different way. Not calendars. Not clocks. Not holidays. The seasons. For a lighthouse keeper, the year did not arrive in neat little boxes hanging on a cottage wall. It unfolded outside his window. One gentle change at a time. The sea never announced that spring had arrived. It simply became a little softer. The wind carried a different scent. The birds returned. The daylight lingered just a little longer each evening. And somehow, without anyone noticing the exact moment, another season quietly began. The keeper had lived beside this stretch of coastline for many years now. Long enough to recognize its smallest habits. He knew which cliff turned golden first beneath the rising sun. He knew where the first wildflowers appeared after winter. He knew which rocky pools warmed earliest beneath the spring sunshine. The coast had become almost like an old friend. One who rarely spoke, but who always kept his promises. Spring always arrived with remarkable patience. There was never a single morning when winter simply packed its bags and departed. Instead, cold days slowly surrendered to milder ones. A patch of green appeared among the brown grasses. Then another. Tiny shoots pushed carefully through the damp soil around the cottage garden. The blackberry bushes, which only weeks before had looked like bundles of sleeping sticks, suddenly produced fresh green leaves. The keeper noticed every one of them. He had time to notice. Modern life often races from one season to another. The lighthouse had no interest in rushing. One particularly bright morning, the keeper stepped outside carrying his usual cup of tea. The air still held a trace of winter's coolness, but something had changed. The silence. Or rather, the absence of silence. Birdsong. Not just the familiar cries of gulls. Smaller birds had returned. Finches flitted among the hedgerows. Larks rose above the meadows, filling the sky with cheerful melodies. Somewhere beyond the cottage, a robin perched confidently upon a fence post. The lighthouse, so peaceful throughout the winter months, slowly became alive once more. Spring also brought work. The vegetable garden needed attention. The wooden fence required another careful inspection after enduring months of wind and rain. The cottage windows welcomed their annual washing. The salt carried inland by winter storms had settled upon almost every surface. Glass. Stone. Wood. Brass. The keeper approached each task with the same steady patience that had become the foundation of his life. There was no race. No competition. Only the quiet satisfaction of caring for things well. Summer arrived almost without warning. One evening, the keeper realized he had lit the lamp noticeably later than usual. The days had grown long. Very long. The sunset seemed reluctant to leave the horizon. Golden light lingered upon the sea until nearly bedtime. The lantern room filled with warm amber colors. The great Fresnel lens transformed into a giant crystal jewel, scattering tiny rainbows across the floor. Even after years of tending the light, the keeper occasionally paused simply to admire it. Some things remain beautiful no matter how many times one witnessed them. Summer was the season of visitors. Not many. The lighthouse remained wonderfully isolated. But more fishing boats passed along the coast. Merchant vessels took advantage of calmer seas. Occasionally, families walking along the cliffs would stop and wave toward the tower. Children often pointed excitedly. To them, the lighthouse seemed enormous. A castle. A giant candle. Perhaps even the home of a mysterious old sailor with remarkable stories. The keeper smiled and raised his hand in return. Their visit lasted only moments before they continued along the coastal path. Soon the quiet returned. The warm evenings brought another small pleasure. The keeper often sat outside the cottage after supper. No lamp needed inside yet. The sky remained bright enough to read for another hour. He unfolded a well-worn book. Perhaps a collection of poems. Perhaps a volume describing distant voyages across the Atlantic. Or perhaps an old Bible whose pages had become soft from years of careful reading. He was in no hurry to finish it. Books, like friendships, could last many years when enjoyed slowly. Sometimes he read only a few pages before lowering the book and simply watching the sea. That was enough. Then came autumn. Perhaps the keeper's favorite season of all. The summer crowds disappeared. The cliffs became wonderfully quiet once again. The grasses turned shades of gold and bronze. Heather covered the hillsides in deep purple. The evenings grew cooler. The sunsets became richer. Orange melted into crimson. Crimson faded into violet. Every evening seemed like a carefully painted masterpiece that lasted only a few precious minutes. The keeper never grew tired of watching. No two sunsets were exactly alike. The sea seemed determined to surprise him, even after all these years. Autumn also carried the comforting scent of preparation. Firewood stacked neatly beside the cottage. Bundles of herbs hanging from the kitchen beams to dry. Fresh loaves cooling upon the windowsill. Apples stored carefully in wooden crates. The pantry slowly filled. Each shelf represented another small promise that winter would be comfortable. The keeper enjoyed these quiet rituals. Preparing for winter felt less like work and more like gratitude. The seasons had provided generously. Now it was his turn to prepare wisely. One crisp October afternoon, while gathering driftwood from the beach below the lighthouse, the keeper noticed something he had almost forgotten to look for. Migrating birds. A great flock crossed high above the sea. Hundreds of tiny dark shapes moving together in graceful formation. Southward. Always southward. The birds required no maps. No compass. No lighthouse. Somehow they knew exactly where they were going. The keeper watched until they became little more than dots against the pale blue sky. Then even those disappeared. He wondered how many generations of keepers had stood on these same rocks, watching those same migrations every autumn. Probably more than anyone could count. As evening settled over the coastline, the first cool breeze of the night brushed gently across the cliffs. The sea had become almost perfectly calm. The surface reflected the sky so clearly that the horizon nearly disappeared. For a moment, it seemed as though the lighthouse stood between two heavens. One above. One below. The keeper climbed the familiar spiral staircase. His boots found each worn stone step without needing to look. The polished brass lamp waited patiently. The great lens stood ready. The oil reservoir was full. Everything was prepared. Exactly as it had been yesterday. Exactly as it would be tomorrow. Outside, the final light of day slipped quietly beneath the western horizon. One by one, the first stars appeared. The keeper struck a match. A tiny flame flickered to life. Moments later, the great beacon awakened once more, sending its faithful light sweeping across the darkening sea. Somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen sailors lifted their eyes toward the familiar flash. And here, upon this lonely stretch of coast, another season continued its slow and beautiful journey, not marked by hurried days or crowded calendars, but by the timeless rhythm of waves, wind, and a lighthouse that never forgot its purpose. The year moved onward. Patiently. Quietly. Just as it always had. The rare visitor, when someone climbs the lighthouse steps. If there is one thing a lighthouse keeper never expects, it is company. Not because visitors are unwelcome. Quite the opposite. A friendly face is always appreciated. It is simply that the lighthouse was built for ships, not for guests. Most days pass with only the sea for conversation. The gulls provide the morning announcements. The wind offers its endless commentary. The waves faithfully repeat stories that have been told for thousands of years. Human voices are wonderfully uncommon. And perhaps that is why they are treasured. One bright afternoon in early summer, the keeper notices movement along the coastal path. Not sheep. Their leisurely pace is quite different. Not seabirds. These figures walk upright. Two adults. A young boy. And a little girl who seems determined to stop every few yards whenever something catches her eye. A particularly colorful flower. A smooth stone. A butterfly drifting across the grass. Children possess an admirable talent for noticing small wonders. The keeper quietly admires this. Adults often walk past beauty because they believe they are late for something. Children rarely make that mistake. The family approaches the whitewashed cottage near the foot of the tower. The father removes his hat. "Good afternoon," he calls. The keeper smiles warmly. "And a good afternoon to you as well." Simple greetings carry surprising weight when they are heard only once every few weeks. The children stare upward. Their mouths fall open. From the bottom, the lighthouse seems impossibly tall. The tower stretches into the blue sky until the lantern room becomes little more than a shining glass crown. The little girl whispers. "Does someone really live here?" The keeper chuckles softly. "I do." She considers this carefully. All the time. Most of it. Her eyes become even wider. The mother glances toward the tower. Would it be terribly inconvenient if we looked inside? Now, this depends entirely upon the lighthouse. Some stations welcome occasional visitors. Others remain strictly working buildings where only authorized keepers are permitted. Today, however, the weather is calm. The evening lighting routine is still several hours away. There is no urgent work waiting. The keeper nods. I believe that can be arranged. The children's excitement is immediate. Not loud. Simply impossible to hide. The great wooden door swings open with its familiar creak. Cool stone air greets everyone as they step inside. The difference in temperature surprises the visitors immediately. Outside, the afternoon sunshine has warmed the cliffs. Inside, the thick walls preserve a pleasant coolness. The spiral staircase begins almost at once. It winds upward like the inside of a giant seashell. The little boy looks upward. Then upward again. Then perhaps a little farther upward. Does it ever end? The keeper smiles. It certainly feels that way when you're carrying heavy oil barrels. The climb begins slowly. Step after step. Round and round. The children's footsteps echo cheerfully against the stone walls. Every few moments they stop beside a small window. Each window reveals the world from a slightly different height. First the garden. Then the cliffs. Then the beach below. Soon the fishing boats appear much smaller. The people walking the shoreline become tiny figures moving through the afternoon sunlight. The higher they climb, the quieter everyone becomes. Not because they are tired. Although they are a little. The view simply encourages silence. Some landscapes seem to ask politely for quiet voices. Halfway up, the keeper pauses. This staircase, he says, resting one hand upon the smooth iron railing, has been climbed thousands upon thousands of times. The children look at the worn stone beneath their feet. Each step curves gently in the middle. Not because it was built that way. Because generations of boots have passed over exactly the same place. Every climb has left the smallest trace. Together, those tiny marks have slowly reshaped the stone itself. History often leaves footprints too gradual to notice in a single lifetime. Finally, they reach the lantern room. For a brief moment. No one speaks. Sunlight pours through the spotless glass. The enormous Fresnel lens stands quietly in the center, its polished surfaces catching the afternoon light and scattering tiny rainbows across the floor. The children walk slowly around it. It looks like a giant diamond, the little girl whispers. The keeper nods. Many people think so. She reaches out instinctively. Then stops. Her mother gently places a hand upon her shoulder. Best not. The keeper smiles kindly. It is stronger than it looks. Still. It deserves gentle hands. The father studies the great lens with fascination. I've seen the light from miles away. So have many others, replies the keeper. But seeing it in daylight feels rather different. It certainly does. Without its evening flame, the lens seems peaceful. Almost asleep. Waiting patiently for sunset. The keeper explains how every section of carefully shaped glass bends the light. How one modest flame becomes a beacon visible for many miles. The children listen with remarkable attention. Perhaps because the explanation feels less like science and more like quiet magic. In truth, it is a little of both. The family steps carefully onto the narrow gallery surrounding the lantern room. A gentle breeze greets them. From here, the coastline stretches endlessly in both directions. Green fields roll softly inland. White waves trace delicate lines along the rocky shore. Far beyond, the sea blends almost seamlessly into the pale summer sky. The little boy grips the railing. I can see forever. The keeper smiles. It certainly feels that way. Of course, no one can truly see forever. But from a lighthouse on a clear afternoon, it comes wonderfully close. After several peaceful minutes, the visitors begin their descent. Going down proves rather easier than climbing up. The children laugh as their footsteps echo around the tower. Outside once more, the father thanks the keeper. "You have a remarkable view." The keeper glances toward the sea. "I've been fortunate." The mother smiles. "It must become lonely." The keeper considers the question. For a moment, he watches a pair of gulls circling above the cliffs. A fishing boat moves slowly across the distant water. The breeze carries the familiar scent of salt and wildflowers. Sometimes, he answers honestly. But not as often as people imagine. She nods. Somehow, she understands. Before leaving, the little girl reaches into her pocket. She produces a tiny white seashell. It is smooth. Perfectly ordinary. And therefore, in its own way, rather beautiful. "I found this on the beach." She holds it toward the keeper. "You can keep it." The keeper hesitates. Then accepts the gift with quiet gratitude. "Thank you. I thought." She smiles shyly. "It might help decorate the lighthouse." "It certainly will." He places the shell carefully upon the windowsill inside the cottage, where the afternoon sunlight catches its gentle curves. It is not valuable. It is not rare. But it will remind him that even the loneliest lighthouse occasionally welcomes unexpected kindness. The family continues along the coastal path until they become small figures against the green hills. Eventually, they disappear beyond the headland. Once again, the lighthouse belongs to its familiar companions. The wind. The waves. The gulls. The endless sky. The keeper returns inside. The little seashell remains upon the windowsill. He smiles whenever he notices it. Not because it is extraordinary, but because it carries the memory of cheerful voices echoing through the spiral staircase, curious children discovering the great lantern for the first time, and a quiet afternoon when the lonely lighthouse felt, for just a little while, like the happiest home on the entire coastline. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly begins its journey toward the western horizon. Soon it will be time to polish the lens once again. To fill the lamp with fresh oil. To trim the wick with practiced hands. And as evening gently settles over the sea, the faithful keeper will climb the winding stairs once more, carrying with him not only the tools of his trade, but also the comforting reminder that even a life devoted to solitude is occasionally brightened by the simple joy of sharing its quiet beauty with others. The keeper's garden, growing small things beside a great sea. The sea provides many things. Fresh air. Endless horizons. A steady breeze. An ever-changing view that never quite repeats itself. But one thing the sea has never been especially enthusiastic about providing is vegetables. A lighthouse keeper quickly learns this simple truth. If you wish to enjoy fresh carrots in the middle of summer, the ocean is unlikely to help. If you hope for onions, potatoes, herbs, or cabbage, those are entirely your responsibility. So beside many 19th-century lighthouses, tucked carefully between stone walls and sheltered from the relentless coastal winds, stood something wonderfully ordinary. A small garden. Not grand. Not decorative. Simply useful. And, over time, deeply loved. The keeper begins tending the garden shortly after breakfast. The morning sun has only just climbed above the eastern horizon. Dew still clings to every blade of grass. Tiny droplets sparkle like scattered diamonds before quietly disappearing into the warmth of the day. He carries only a few familiar tools. A small spade. A wooden-handled hoe polished smooth by years of use. A watering can. And a woven basket that has already survived so many harvests that no one remembers exactly how old it is. Like most things in the keeper's life, the tools are simple. Well made. Carefully maintained. Perfectly dependable. The garden itself occupies only a modest patch of land behind the cottage. A low stone wall surrounds it. Not to keep people out. There are hardly any people. The wall serves a far more important purpose. It slows the wind. Coastal breezes possess remarkable enthusiasm. Unfortunately, young vegetables rarely share that enthusiasm. Without protection, tender plants would spend half the summer leaning dramatically toward the nearest county. The stone wall softens the strongest gusts, creating a tiny pocket of calm where vegetables may grow in peace. It is a clever solution. One perfected by generations of gardeners who understood that working with nature usually succeeds better than arguing with it. The first row belongs to potatoes. Reliable. Patient. Unpretentious. If vegetables awarded medals for dependability, potatoes would almost certainly receive one every year. The keeper loosens the soil around each plant with careful movements. Not too deeply. Potatoes prefer gentle encouragement. Their green leaves flutter softly in the morning breeze. Hidden beneath the earth, the real harvest quietly continues growing where no one can see it. There is something comforting about that. Not every worthwhile thing announces its progress. Some achievements happen quietly beneath the surface. Beside the potatoes grows a neat row of onions. Their long green leaves sway gently like tiny flags. Nearby stand sturdy cabbages. Unlike the onions, cabbages appear wonderfully confident. Each broad leaf spreads outward as though attempting to occupy just a little more space than strictly necessary. The keeper chuckles. Every garden seems to contain one vegetable convinced it deserves extra room. The cabbages make a persuasive case. Fresh herbs grow closest to the cottage door. Not because they are delicate. Because they are used almost every day. Parsley. Thyme. Sage. Mint. A few sprigs of rosemary where the weather allows. The keeper brushes his hand gently across the leaves. Immediately the morning air fills with fragrance. Sharp mint. Earthy thyme. The clean scent of rosemary. A kitchen garden is as much about smell as it is about taste. Each herb carries the memory of countless meals. Soup simmering over the fire. Fresh bread cooling upon the table. Roasted fish seasoned with thyme gathered only moments before. Simple ingredients. Prepared with care. Growing food beside the sea is rarely easy. Salt carried by the wind settles upon every leaf. The soil must be worked carefully. Rain sometimes arrives in generous abundance. At other times, weeks pass beneath clear skies. The keeper learns to adapt. A little more water today. A little extra mulch tomorrow. A loose branch tied gently upright after a windy afternoon. Gardening teaches patience better than almost any other occupation. Plants refuse to hurry. The lighthouse keeper understands them perfectly. Around mid-morning, a familiar visitor appears. A robin lands confidently upon the garden wall. It tilts its head first one way. Then the other. Watching. Waiting. The keeper smiles without looking up. He has seen this little bird almost every day throughout the spring. Experience has taught them both an agreeable arrangement. As the keeper turns the soil, tiny insects occasionally become exposed. The robin politely waits. When the keeper moves forward a few steps, the bird hops into the freshly turned earth to enjoy an unexpected breakfast. Neither disturbs the other. They have become quiet partners. Nearby, several honeybees drift lazily between blossoms. Their work appears unhurried. Yet somehow, by the end of every day, astonishing amounts have been accomplished. Flower after flower. Minute after minute. The keeper often admires bees. Not simply because they help the garden. Because they demonstrate something rather important. Steady work, repeated faithfully, achieves remarkable things. There is no dramatic rush. No frantic excitement. Just consistency. It is a philosophy the lighthouse keeper understands completely. Toward noon, the sun grows pleasantly warm. The keeper pauses beneath the shade of an old apple tree standing near the edge of the garden. It is not especially large. Coastal winds rarely permit trees to become magnificent giants. Instead, it grows low and sturdy. Its branches lean gently away from the prevailing breeze, shaped by decades of patient resistance. Every tree beside the sea carries the story of the wind. This one has learned not to fight. Only to bend. There is wisdom in that. The keeper unwraps a simple midday meal. A thick slice of fresh bread. Cheese. An apple saved from last autumn's harvest. And, naturally, a cup of tea. Even here, among rows of vegetables and singing birds, tea remains an essential companion. He sits quietly. No newspaper. No pressing schedule. Only the gentle buzzing of bees and the distant murmur of waves meeting the cliffs below. It is enough. More than enough. After lunch comes watering. The rain barrel beside the cottage is comfortably full thanks to showers earlier in the week. The keeper fills his watering can. Its metal handle feels pleasantly cool. He moves slowly between each row. The water falls in soft streams rather than hurried splashes. Each plant receives exactly what it needs. No more. No less. The soil darkens immediately. A fresh earthy scent rises into the warm afternoon air. It is one of the oldest smells in human history. Fresh water meeting dry ground. Generations before this keeper, countless gardeners paused for just a moment to enjoy exactly the same fragrance. Some experiences never grow old. As the afternoon light begins to soften, the keeper gathers a small harvest. A handful of onions. Fresh parsley. A few carrots. Several sprigs of thyme. Nothing extravagant. Just enough for tonight's supper. The basket is not heavy. Yet somehow it feels wonderfully satisfying. There is quiet pride in preparing a meal partly grown by one's own hands. The sea may provide fish. The garden provides the rest. Together they create everything the keeper truly needs. Before leaving, he closes the small wooden gate behind him. The vegetables stand quietly in the gentle breeze. The bees continue their patient work. The robin remains perched upon the stone wall, keeping watch over his tiny kingdom. Beyond the garden, the great lighthouse rises confidently against the afternoon sky. Stone. Glass. Iron. Purpose. Beside it rests another kind of labor. Living things growing one careful day at a time. One guides ships across dangerous waters. The other quietly fills a supper bowl. Both require patience. Both depend upon faithful daily care. And as the shadows lengthen across the little garden, the keeper carries his basket toward the cottage, knowing that before long he will exchange his gardening tools for an oil can, a polishing cloth, and the familiar climb up the winding staircase, where another peaceful evening waits high above the sea, and another gentle light will soon begin its nightly journey across the darkening horizon. The long winter storm that never quite arrived. If you have ever visited the sea in winter, you will know something rather curious. The ocean has an extraordinary talent for looking dramatic. Even on days when it intends no real trouble at all, it can appear wonderfully serious. Dark clouds gather. The wind freshens. The waves grow taller. The gulls disappear inland. Everything seems to whisper. Something important may happen. Sometimes it does. Often. It simply rains. The lighthouse keeper has learned not to be impressed too easily. Experience teaches that the loudest weather is not always the most dangerous, and the quietest skies are not always the safest. So when one gray January morning begins with a restless sea and thick clouds rolling in from the west, he does not panic. He simply begins preparing. Preparation is one of the quietest forms of wisdom. The morning light struggles to reach the cliffs. The sun is somewhere beyond the blanket of cloud, but no one would guess exactly where. The sea has lost its familiar blue. Instead, it wears shades of silver, charcoal, and slate. The horizon seems softer today. Sky and water blend together until they become almost impossible to separate. Only years of careful observation allow the keeper to distinguish one from the other. He stands outside the cottage for several moments. His wool coat flutters gently. The wind is stronger than yesterday. Not fierce. Just, determined. The first task of the morning is not inside the lighthouse. It is outside. The keeper walks slowly around the buildings, inspecting everything the weather might notice. A loose shutter. Secure. The rain barrel. Covered. The garden gate. Latched firmly. A stack of firewood beside the cottage. Neatly protected beneath its canvas covering. The small fishing boat resting above the high tide line. Pulled another few feet inland. Every task takes only a minute or two. Together, they may save hours of trouble later. The sea has taught him a valuable lesson. Small preparations prevent large problems. Nearby, the sheep have already made their own decision. Yesterday they wandered across the hillside with little concern for anything except fresh grass. Today they remain close together behind a low stone wall. Animals often notice subtle changes before people do. The keeper watches them thoughtfully. Perhaps they expect heavier rain. Perhaps they simply dislike cold wind. Either way, they seem perfectly content where they are. He wishes them a pleasant afternoon. Not aloud. One rarely speaks directly to sheep. They already appear convinced they know everything worth knowing. By mid-morning, the breeze has become a steady wind. The grasses upon the cliffs ripple like waves themselves. Small whitecaps begin appearing across the sea. Far offshore, a merchant brig adjusts its sails. The keeper watches through his brass telescope. The vessel turns slightly, choosing a course that gives the coastline a respectful distance. A wise captain never argues with winter weather. The keeper nods approvingly. Good seamanship often consists of making quiet decisions before anyone else realizes they are necessary. Back inside the tower, the lantern room receives an extra inspection. The great glass panels are spotless. The brass fittings gleam warmly despite the gloomy sky outside. The Fresnel lens catches what little daylight filters through the clouds, scattering pale reflections across the floor. The keeper gently checks every fastening, every hinge, every latch. Not because he expects disaster. Because careful habits deserve consistency. One loose screw ignored on a calm day may become troublesome during a windy one. Today is an excellent day for attention to detail. The afternoon settles into a steady rhythm. Rain begins. Not the dramatic kind that crashes against windows. Instead, a gentle drizzle drifts almost sideways upon the wind. Tiny droplets collect upon the lantern glass. The cliffs darken with moisture. The paths become soft beneath the keeper's boots. Inside the cottage, however, everything remains wonderfully cozy. The fire crackles cheerfully. A kettle sings softly upon the stove. The scent of vegetable soup fills the little kitchen. Carrots from the garden. Potatoes harvested before winter. Onions stored carefully in the pantry. A handful of dried thyme gathered months ago. Simple ingredients. Prepared slowly. Nothing tastes quite as satisfying as warm soup while rain taps politely against the windows. After lunch, the keeper settles into one of his favorite winter routines. Mending. Every household possesses small things waiting patiently to be repaired. A loose button upon a wool coat. A tiny tear in a blanket. A fraying rope handle on a basket. None are urgent. None are dramatic. Yet each deserves attention before becoming something larger. He threads a needle carefully. The afternoon passes with remarkable contentment. Outside, the wind continues its conversation with the sea. Inside, only the soft scratch of thread through cloth disturbs the quiet. As daylight begins fading unusually early, as winter days often do, the weather finally reaches its greatest excitement. The wind whistles briefly around the tower. The rain falls a little harder. The waves throw white spray against the rocks below. For perhaps half an hour, the lighthouse feels wonderfully alive. Not endangered. Simply awake. The tower has stood through far greater storms than this. Its thick stone walls have listened to winter gales for generations. Today's weather barely earns a polite acknowledgement. The keeper smiles. Some storms become famous. Others merely pass the afternoon. Evening arrives wrapped in gray clouds. The lantern room grows dim. It is time. The keeper carries fresh oil upstairs. His boots echo softly upon the familiar spiral staircase. Every step feels reassuring. He knows each curve of these worn stone stairs as well as another person might know the rooms of their own home. At the top, he begins the evening ritual. The oil reservoir is full. The wick is trimmed perfectly. The polished brass reflects the first glow of his match. One small flame appears. Then another. Within moments, the great lamp awakens. The Fresnel lens gathers its light. Shapes it. Strengthens it. Sends it confidently sweeping across the dark sea. Outside, the beam stretches through mist and rain alike. Each slow rotation paints the night with quiet certainty. Far offshore, the captain of the brig glimpses the familiar flash. He adjusts his course slightly. No words are exchanged. None are necessary. The lighthouse speaks in light. The sailors answer with trust. For more than a century, this silent conversation has guided countless ships home. Later that evening, the rain begins to weaken. The wind grows less determined. Clouds slowly drift apart. One bright star appears overhead. Then another. The sea gradually settles. The much-anticipated winter storm has quietly changed its mind. By midnight, the cliffs are peaceful once more. Only the wet stones remember the rain. The keeper steps onto the narrow gallery outside the lantern room. The air smells wonderfully fresh. The world has become clean again. The moon emerges from behind the last cloud, turning every puddle into a tiny mirror. Far below, gentle waves wash softly against the rocks. The sea seems almost apologetic for all its earlier commotion. The keeper chuckles to himself. That wasn't so bad. The ocean, of course, offers no reply. It never explains itself. Before returning inside, he pauses beside the lantern for one final look across the sleeping coastline. The beam turns steadily. The stars shine brightly above. The wind has settled into little more than a whisper. Tomorrow morning, the gulls will return to the cliffs as though nothing unusual had happened. The sheep will wander back into the fields. The garden will wait patiently beneath the winter sky. The logbook will receive another brief entry. Light rain. Moderate winds. Lamp burned steadily throughout the night. No unusual occurrences. And perhaps that final sentence captures the greatest gift of lighthouse life. Not excitement. Not adventure. But the quiet comfort of discovering that even when the world appears uncertain for a little while, steady hands, careful preparation, and a faithful light are often more than enough to see you safely through the night. The sound of silence, nights without a single ship. If you ask someone to imagine a lighthouse, they will probably picture the same scene. A lonely tower. A brilliant beam of light. A stormy sea. And somewhere, just beyond the darkness, a ship searching desperately for safe passage. It is a beautiful image. It has appeared in paintings, novels, and films for generations. There is only one small problem. Many nights. There are no ships at all. None. Not one. The lighthouse shines faithfully across an empty sea, hour after hour, with no audience except the moon, the stars, and the patient waves below. For the keeper, these are some of the quietest nights of all. This evening begins much like countless others. The sunset has faded into soft shades of lavender and deep blue. The final glow lingers just above the western horizon before quietly disappearing beneath the sea. The first stars appear one by one. Not all at once. The heavens seem to awaken gradually, as though stretching after a long day. The keeper watches them from the gallery surrounding the lantern room. He knows many of the constellations by heart. Not because he is an astronomer. Because they have become old companions. When you spend enough nights beneath the open sky, the stars begin to feel strangely familiar. The lamp burns with its usual calm brilliance. Its great Fresnel lens gathers the modest flame and transforms it into something extraordinary. The beam sweeps across the water. Round and round. Every 30 seconds, the coastline briefly glows before fading back into darkness. The rhythm is soothing. Almost hypnotic. Light. Dark. Light. Dark. Never hurried. Never delayed. Perfectly dependable. Far below, the sea lies almost completely still. Not flat. The ocean is rarely flat. Instead, gentle swells rise and fall with remarkable patience. Moonlight scatters across their surface in countless silver fragments. Each tiny wave catches the light for only a moment before passing it to the next. The entire sea appears to shimmer. If someone had poured liquid silver across the water, it might look something like this. The keeper leans lightly upon the iron railing. There is nowhere else he would rather be. He lifts his brass telescope almost out of habit. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. To the north, nothing. To the south, nothing. Eastward, only moonlight. Westward, the final trace of twilight. Not a single sail interrupts the view. No merchant brig. No fishing smack. No coastal schooner. The sea belongs entirely to itself tonight. The keeper lowers the telescope. He smiles. Some people might find such emptiness lonely. He finds it peaceful. Inside the lantern room, everything moves with gentle precision. The clockwork mechanism quietly turns. The gears produce a soft ticking sound. Not loud enough to disturb the silence. Only enough to remind the keeper that the great lens continues its patient rotation. Every hour, he checks the machinery. A small adjustment here. A touch of oil there. Nothing dramatic. Machines, much like gardens, reward regular attention. Ignore them for weeks, and they become troublesome. Care for them daily, and they serve faithfully for years. The silence surrounding the lighthouse is unlike the silence most people know. Cities are never truly silent. Even in the middle of the night, distant wheels rumble over cobblestones. Dogs bark. Doors close. Someone somewhere remains awake. The countryside has its own quiet language. Owls. Crickets. Leaves whispering in the breeze. But here, far out upon the coast, the silence possesses another character entirely. It is filled with gentle sounds. The endless breathing of the sea. The faint whistle of wind slipping around the lantern glass. The occasional creak of ancient timbers settling into place. The quiet hiss of the lamp itself. The silence is not empty. It is simply uncluttered. The keeper has grown remarkably fond of this kind of quiet. When he first arrived years ago, it felt almost overwhelming. He had been accustomed to villages. Church bells. Horse carts. Conversations drifting through open windows. The lighthouse seemed impossibly still. For weeks, every tiny sound caught his attention. A gull landing on the roof. Rain tapping the glass. The distant splash of a seal entering the water. Gradually, however, his ears changed. He no longer searched for noise. He began listening to quiet instead. It is an entirely different skill. Around midnight, he prepares another pot of tea. The ritual changes very little from season to season. Fresh water. A black iron kettle. Loose tea leaves carefully measured. The steam rises gently into the cool night air. He pours the tea into his favorite stoneware mug. The cup bears a tiny crack near its handle. It has been there for years. The keeper has never replaced it. Not because he cannot. Because it still performs its duty perfectly well. Many useful things continue serving long after they lose their perfect appearance. He carries the warm mug outside onto the gallery. The night air is cool but comfortable. Above him stretches a sky so brilliantly clear that the Milky Way appears almost like a pale river flowing across the heavens. Thousands upon thousands of stars shine overhead. Without electric lights, 19th-century skies reveal astonishing detail. Some nights, the keeper believes there are more stars than darkness. He knows that cannot truly be so. Still, it certainly feels that way. His thoughts drift gently. Not toward worries. There are surprisingly few of those tonight. The lamp burns beautifully. The weather remains calm. The pantry is well supplied. Instead, he remembers small moments. The little girl who left him the seashell. The robin following him through the garden. The supply captain laughing about a stubborn goat at another lighthouse. His first winter beside the sea. His mother teaching him to mend a wool sock before he left home. Memory, he has discovered, behaves rather like the tide. It arrives quietly. Brings unexpected treasures. Then slips away again. A shooting star suddenly crosses the sky. Bright. Silent. Gone. It lasts no longer than a heartbeat. The keeper watches its path disappear into the darkness. He wonders whether someone aboard a distant ship saw it too. Perhaps. Perhaps not. Tonight there may be no ships at all. The star simply performed its brief journey for whoever happened to be looking upward. Sometimes that is enough. The hours continue unfolding with remarkable gentleness. 1 o'clock. Then 2. The beam never falters. The sea remains empty. The logbook receives another brief note. Visibility excellent. Sea calm. No vessels observed during the watch. Only 3 short lines. Yet they describe an entire night. Some historians might overlook such an entry. The keeper never would. Ordinary nights deserve to be remembered too. Just before dawn, the eastern horizon begins to soften. Not with color at first. Only with the slightest hint that darkness is becoming less complete. The stars nearest the horizon quietly fade. The sea changes from black to deep blue. The lighthouse beam remains visible, but now it competes gently with the approaching morning. Another night has passed without excitement. Without emergencies. Without a single ship. The keeper considers that a blessing. After all, the purpose of the lighthouse is not to witness adventures. Its purpose is to ensure that adventures end safely. As the first pale rays of sunrise spread across the quiet ocean, the keeper extinguishes the lamp with the same calm care he has practiced for countless mornings. The great Fresnel lens catches the new daylight. The tower settles into its daytime silence. Below, the waves continue their timeless rhythm against the rocks. The gulls begin calling from the cliffs. Somewhere in the garden, the robin has already started another busy morning. Life resumes its familiar pace. The keeper closes the lantern room windows, glances once more across the empty sea, and smiles to himself. Last night, no sailors ever saw the lighthouse. No ships passed its beam. No one thanked the keeper. Yet the light shone exactly as faithfully as if the entire ocean had depended upon it. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson the old lighthouse has been teaching all along. True purpose is not measured by how many people notice your work. Sometimes, the most meaningful duty is simply showing up, night after peaceful night, whether anyone is watching or not. The keeper's library, a shelf full of quiet adventures. There is a common misunderstanding about lonely places. People often imagine that solitude must surely lead to boredom. They picture long afternoons with nothing to do. Endless hours stretching across the day. A person sitting by a window, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The lighthouse keeper would probably smile politely at this idea. Because, although his world is wonderfully quiet, it is never empty. There is always work. There is always the sea. There is always the changing sky. And, perhaps most faithfully of all, there are books. Tucked into one corner of the cottage stands a modest wooden bookshelf. It is not particularly tall. Perhaps 5 shelves altogether. The wood has darkened with age, polished smooth by decades of careful dusting. Its edges bear the tiny scratches that every well-used piece of furniture eventually earns. Nothing about it would attract attention. Yet to the keeper, it is one of the most valuable possessions he owns. Not because the books are expensive. Most are not. But because every one of them has become an old friend. On winter evenings, after the lamp has been lit and the first inspection of the lantern room is complete, the keeper often returns to the cottage. The fire burns softly in the hearth. The kettle sings its familiar song. Outside, the lighthouse continues its faithful work without complaint. Inside, another journey quietly begins. He reaches toward the bookshelf. Not hurriedly. Choosing a book deserves a little thought. Much like selecting a favorite path for an evening walk. The first shelf contains practical books. Volumes that have earned their place through usefulness rather than excitement. Navigation manuals. Collections of tide tables. Guides to weather observation. Instructions for maintaining lamps and clockwork machinery. These books are opened often. Their pages carry faint fingerprints of oil and soot. Tiny notes have been written in the margins by previous owners. Replace this bolt before winter. Best oil obtained from Bristol supplier. Watch for fog after easterly winds. Each note is like a quiet conversation between keepers separated by many years. The second shelf belongs to history. The keeper enjoys reading about ancient kingdoms, forgotten castles, and distant civilizations. Sometimes, sitting beside the warm fire while rain taps gently against the windows, he imagines bustling Roman streets. Medieval monasteries perched upon misty hills. Ancient Egyptian temples glowing beneath desert sunlight. The remarkable thing about books, he often thinks, is that they allow a man living alone on a remote coastline to travel farther than many sailors ever will. His boots never leave the cottage floor. Yet his imagination crosses continents before bedtime. The third shelf contains stories. Not thrilling adventures filled with sword fights and daring escapes. At least, not usually. The keeper prefers gentle tales. Stories about ordinary people. Farmers. Teachers. Travelers. Families. Lives measured not by fame but by kindness. Characters who mend fences instead of fighting dragons. Who plant gardens instead of conquering kingdoms. There is something deeply comforting about such stories. Perhaps because they resemble real life. One particular novel has become a favorite over the years. Its leather cover has faded almost to brown. Several pages have loosened from the binding. The corners curl slightly. The keeper has read it so many times that he could almost recite certain passages from memory. Yet each winter, he opens it once again. Not because he has forgotten the ending. But because familiar stories offer a special kind of comfort. Like returning to a familiar harbor after a long voyage. Knowing exactly what awaits does not lessen the pleasure. Sometimes it deepens it. Books also preserve voices. Some belong to authors who lived generations before the keeper himself. People he could never meet. Yet every evening, as he turns another page, their thoughts quietly fill the room. One writer describes forests. Another explains distant mountain ranges. A third shares poems about moonlight upon rivers. the keeper realizes something remarkable. Across centuries and countless miles, complete strangers continue keeping each other company. Ink possesses an extraordinary ability to outlive its author. Occasionally, the supply boat delivers more than food, lamp oil, and letters. Every now and then, tucked carefully inside a wooden crate, rests a new book. The keeper always notices it immediately. There is something wonderfully exciting about a book whose pages remain uncut. Its spine still stiff. It's sent fresh with paper and binding glue. Before reading, he examines the cover. Reads the title. Studies the illustrations, if there are any. Only then does he begin the first page. Never hurriedly. A new book deserves a proper welcome. On particularly windy evenings, reading becomes even more enjoyable. The cottage feels warm and secure. Outside, rain sweeps across the cliffs. The windows rattle softly. The chimney hums with the changing breeze. Meanwhile, inside the little room, only three sounds remain. The crackling fire. The quiet turning of pages. The distant heartbeat of the lighthouse mechanism rotating steadily above. Together, they create a rhythm unlike any orchestra. A peaceful music composed entirely of ordinary things. The keeper has a favorite chair beside the hearth. It was already old when he first arrived years ago. Its wooden arms have grown smooth from countless evenings of use. The cushion has flattened slightly. One leg wobbles ever so gently unless a folded piece of cloth rests beneath it. He has often considered repairing it properly. Then decides against it. The chair and its little wobble have become old companions. Not every imperfection requires correction. Some simply become part of the story. Tonight, he chooses a collection of travel journals. The author spent years exploring distant coastlines far across the Atlantic. Towering cliffs. Frozen northern seas. Islands where thousands of seabirds nested upon black volcanic rocks. The descriptions are vivid enough that the keeper almost smells the salt air. He smiles. How curious. A man reading about another man standing beside another sea. The world, despite its enormous size, sometimes feels surprisingly small. After several chapters, he pauses. Not because he has grown tired. Because he hears something outside. A gentle tapping against the window. He looks up. Only rain. Tiny drops dancing softly upon the glass. He returns to his book. Rain has a remarkable talent for improving almost every story. The fire burns lower. The kettle has long since emptied. The room glows with soft amber light cast by a single oil lamp resting upon the table. Shadows stretch peacefully across the walls. The books upon the shelves seem almost alive in the flickering light, each waiting patiently for its turn to be opened again. The keeper closes the travel journal carefully. He slips a narrow ribbon between the pages to mark his place. Tomorrow evening, he will continue. There is no reason to hurry toward the final chapter. Good books, like good conversations, deserve time. Before climbing the spiral staircase for another inspection of the great lantern, he pauses beside the bookshelf. His fingers rest lightly against the worn leather spines. He thinks about all the people who wrote these words. The printers who carefully set every letter. The binders who stitched every page. The sailors who carried the books across the sea. The shopkeeper who sold them. The friend who once gifted him a volume for Christmas many winters ago. A surprising number of hands have quietly contributed to this little library. None of them could have imagined that their work would one day accompany a solitary lighthouse keeper through long coastal nights. Outside, darkness has settled completely over the sea. The lighthouse beam continues its endless circle across the sleeping water. Inside the cottage, the books wait patiently upon their shelves, asking for nothing more than another quiet evening and a willing reader. The keeper smiles as he reaches for his lantern. There are still several hours left before dawn. The light must be checked. The gears must be inspected. The logbook will receive another careful entry. And afterward, perhaps before the first hint of sunrise, there may still be time for one more chapter before the day begins again. For even in the quietest corner of the 19th century, beside a lonely tower standing watch over an endless sea, a single shelf of well-loved books could carry a person farther than the horizon, and gently remind him that no one who loves to read is ever truly alone. A new year beside the same old sea. A new year arrives at the lighthouse much the same way the old one departed. Quietly. There are no fireworks bursting above the cliffs. No church bells ringing through crowded streets. No grand celebrations that stretch late into the night. The sea has little interest in calendars. The waves that touched the rocks on the final evening of December return on the first morning of January with exactly the same patient rhythm. The wind does not suddenly change direction because a page has turned. The gulls do not gather to announce the beginning of another year. Nature, it seems, prefers gradual change over dramatic moments. The lighthouse keeper has come to admire this. He wakes before dawn, as he has on thousands of mornings before. For a brief moment, lying beneath his heavy wool blankets, he listens. The familiar sounds reassure him immediately. The slow breathing of the sea below the cliffs. The faint whistle of winter wind around the cottage chimney. The soft ticking of the mantel clock beside the fireplace. Everything is exactly where it should be. There is a certain comfort in beginning a new year without surprises. The fire in the hearth has faded to glowing embers. The keeper kneels and adds 2 carefully chosen logs. Dry oak burns slowly. Ash burns warmly. He has learned which wood is best for a long winter morning. Soon, orange flames begin dancing once again. The little cottage gradually fills with gentle warmth. The kettle is placed above the fire almost automatically. Some habits become so familiar that they feel less like decisions and more like breathing. Tea has always been part of the morning. The new year sees no reason to change that. As the water begins to simmer, the keeper opens the cottage door. Cold air greets him immediately. The kind that feels wonderfully clean. Every breath carries the sharp scent of salt, damp stone, and distant pine carried inland by the winter wind. The eastern horizon remains dark. Yet there is the faintest suggestion of silver where the sky meets the sea. Morning is approaching. Patiently. As it always does. He steps onto the frost-covered path. The grass crunches softly beneath his boots. Tiny crystals sparkle across the ground like scattered sugar. Each blade of grass wears its own delicate coat of ice. The garden sleeps peacefully beneath the winter sky. The cabbage stands bravely in one corner. Everything else waits beneath the soil for spring. The keeper smiles. Gardens understand something important. Rest is part of growth. His first destination is not the tower. It is the rain barrel. He lifts the wooden lid. A thin layer of ice has formed across the surface. Not thick. Only enough to remind him that January has settled comfortably upon the coast. Using the handle of a small wooden spoon, he gently breaks the ice. It cracks with a surprisingly cheerful sound. Tiny floating pieces drift quietly apart. A simple task. Completed in less than a minute. Yet another reminder that life beside the sea is built from hundreds of small moments. Soon, the familiar climb begins. The spiral staircase welcomes him once more. The stone steps have become trusted companions over the years. He hardly notices them now. His feet seem to know exactly where every worn edge lies. The narrow windows allow pale morning light to filter into the tower. Outside, the sea slowly reveals itself. Black becomes blue. Blue becomes gray. Gray gradually brightens beneath the approaching sunrise. It is less like turning on a lamp and more like watching an artist gently add color to a canvas. At the lantern room, the great lamp has completed another faithful night. The flame burns lower now, waiting patiently to be extinguished. The keeper performs the familiar sequence. Close the air vents. Reduce the flame. Allow the light to fade naturally. He never rushes this moment. The lighthouse has served the darkness well. It deserves a graceful farewell before daylight takes over. Slowly, the brilliant beacon softens. Its glow becomes golden. Then amber. Then a tiny flicker. Finally. Only the morning sun remains. The great Fresnel lens catches the first rays of daylight. Without the lamp burning, it appears almost invisible. Only when sunlight strikes its countless glass prisms does its remarkable craftsmanship become obvious. Rainbows dance briefly across the floor. Blue. Gold. Green. Tiny flashes of color move across the walls before quietly disappearing. The keeper watches them for a moment. He never grows tired of this little morning performance. Even the oldest routines can still contain wonder. Cleaning begins as always. A soft cloth removes the faint traces of soot left by the night's flame. Each brass fitting receives careful attention. The polished metal reflects the growing daylight more brightly with every pass. Salt has gathered upon the outside glass during the night. A bucket of fresh water. A clean cloth. Slow circles. There is no shortcut. The sea rewards patience. The lighthouse demands it. The keeper offers it willingly. By the time the tower is spotless, the sun has climbed fully above the horizon. Golden light spreads across the ocean. The winter sea seems calmer than yesterday. Small fishing boats appear in the distance. Only two. Perhaps three. Their white sails glow softly against the pale blue sky. The keeper lifts his brass telescope. One vessel belongs to old Captain Morgan. He recognizes the patched mainsail immediately. Another boat appears unfamiliar. Perhaps visitors from the next harbor. He wishes them calm seas. Though they cannot hear him, it feels like the proper thing to do. Returning to the cottage, he prepares a slightly more generous breakfast than usual. Not because it is a holiday. Simply because fresh bread was baked yesterday. Warm slices are toasted over the fire. A little butter melts into every corner. Blackberry preserves from last summer wait patiently inside a small stone jar. The tea is poured. Steam curls upward. Outside the kitchen window, a robin lands upon the garden fence. It has returned once again. The little bird tilts its head expectantly. The keeper laughs quietly. He breaks off a tiny crumb of bread and places it upon the windowsill. The robin wastes no time. Some friendships require very few words. The rest of the morning passes peacefully. The logbook receives its first entry of the new year. The keeper writes carefully. His handwriting remains as neat as ever. January 1st. Weather clear after sunrise. Light northerly breeze. Visibility excellent. Lamp extinguished at dawn after a steady night's service. He pauses before writing one final sentence. Then smiles. The new year begins quietly. He blows gently across the fresh ink. Closes the heavy leather cover. Places the book back upon its familiar shelf. Some years begin with celebration. Others begin with gratitude. The keeper prefers the second. As afternoon slowly settles across the coastline, he walks to the edge of the cliffs carrying nothing except his favorite walking stick. The sea stretches endlessly before him. Exactly the same sea that greeted countless keepers before him. Exactly the same sea that will greet countless keepers after he is gone. The thought does not make him feel small. Instead, it makes him feel connected. He is only one caretaker in a very long line. One pair of steady hands watching over one faithful light. There is quiet honor in that. The winter sun begins its early descent. Long shadows stretch across the frozen grass. The lighthouse tower casts a tall silhouette over the cliffs, pointing silently toward the sea. Soon it will be time once again. The oil reservoir will be filled. The wick carefully trimmed. The great lens polished one final time. Another evening. Another night. Another circle of light sweeping faithfully across the dark Atlantic. The keeper climbs the familiar spiral staircase with calm, measured steps. Behind him, one year has quietly become another. Ahead of him, nothing seems very different at all. And perhaps that is the greatest gift the old lighthouse offers. It reminds us that life does not always need dramatic beginnings to become meaningful. Sometimes, the most beautiful new chapters begin exactly where the last one ended, with a steady heart, a quiet purpose, and the endless sea waiting patiently below. The supply boat that arrives only once a month. Life at a lighthouse is wonderfully peaceful. But peaceful does not mean completely independent. Even the most self-sufficient keeper depends upon the outside world now and then. Lamp oil does not appear by itself. Flour does not quietly refill the pantry. Fresh nails never grow upon the workbench. Tea, unfortunately, cannot be harvested from windswept coastal cliffs. Sooner or later, every lighthouse waits for the same visitor. The supply boat. Unlike city deliveries, which arrive almost every day, the supply boat follows a slower rhythm. Sometimes every month. Sometimes every 6 weeks. Occasionally even longer if winter storms decide to interfere. The keeper never knows the exact hour it will appear. Only that, sooner or later, a familiar sail will emerge beyond the headland. Until then, life continues as usual. Several days before the expected delivery, the keeper begins preparing. Preparation makes everything easier. He opens the pantry door. Wooden shelves line the walls from floor to ceiling. Each contains neat rows of carefully stored supplies. Glass jars filled with oats. Canvas sacks of flour. Small barrels of salt. Bundles of dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams. Everything has its proper place. He checks each item one by one. Not because he has forgotten. Because certainty is always preferable to guessing. He opens the flour barrel. Enough for perhaps 3 more weeks. Comfortable. The tea tin rattles gently when lifted. Still nearly half full. Excellent. The lamp oil, however, deserves attention. He lowers a slender wooden measuring stick into the storage barrel. When he withdraws it, the dark line tells the story immediately. Enough remains. But only just. Fresh oil will be welcome. The lighthouse can function without many things. It cannot function without light. On a small sheet of thick paper, the keeper writes a list. The handwriting is neat and deliberate. 2 barrels of lamp oil. 1 sack of flour. Fresh candles. Replacement wicks. A coil of strong rope. A small box of nails. Writing paper. Ink. Tea. Perhaps, if space allows. Another book. He smiles at the final item. Books are not necessities. Yet somehow they always feel essential. 3 mornings later, he climbs to the lantern room shortly after sunrise. The weather is unusually clear. The sea stretches toward the horizon beneath a pale blue sky. He lifts his brass telescope. At first, nothing. Only waves sparkling beneath the morning sun. Then, a tiny white triangle. Almost too small to notice. A sail. The keeper adjusts the focus. Yes. There can be little doubt. The supply boat is finally coming. He does not hurry. There is no reason. The boat remains several miles away. Instead, he returns downstairs and begins his ordinary work. The lamp is cleaned. The brass polished. The logbook updated. The garden watered. There is a quiet confidence in knowing exactly when to hurry. And exactly when not to. The supply boat will arrive when it arrives. The sea has never accepted impatient schedules. By late morning, the vessel rounds the rocky point guarding the harbor. It is a modest coastal cutter. Sturdy rather than elegant. Its hull bears the familiar marks of honest work. Salt has weathered the paint. The sails have been patched more than once. The keeper recognizes the captain immediately. Old Captain Ellis. His beard has become slightly grayer since last autumn. Otherwise, he appears exactly the same. Some people seem almost unchanged by time. Perhaps life beside the sea encourages that. The small boat anchors in the sheltered cove below the lighthouse. Soon, a rowboat carries the captain and 1 young deckhand toward shore. The oars dip steadily into the water. Splash. Pull. Splash. Pull. The rhythm echoes gently across the quiet bay. The keeper waits near the stone landing. When the boat reaches the rocks, Captain Ellis removes his weathered cap. Morning. A fine morning indeed, the keeper replies. The captain smiles. Much better than the crossing last month. I heard it was rather rough. The captain laughs. Rough enough to convince every barrel aboard that it preferred standing upside down. Together, they begin unloading the cargo. Nothing extravagant. Exactly what the lighthouse needs. Heavy barrels of oil. Canvas sacks filled with flour. Boxes of candles wrapped carefully against moisture. Fresh rope, smelling faintly of hemp and tar. Bundles of firewood. A crate containing several small tools requested months earlier. The young deckhand carries each item with determined enthusiasm. The keeper remembers being young enough to believe that heavy lifting was enjoyable. Age has taught him otherwise. Everything is carried carefully to the storage shed beside the cottage. The keeper checks each delivery against his list. Nothing is missing. Nothing has been damaged. He thanks the captain sincerely. Reliable deliveries deserve appreciation. Especially in winter. Especially beside the sea. Once the work is finished, there is always time for tea. The captain would consider leaving without sharing a cup, almost impolite. Inside the cottage, the kettle soon begins singing above the fire. 3 mugs are placed upon the wooden table. The young deckhand accepts his with obvious gratitude. There is something about carrying heavy barrels that makes tea taste unusually satisfying. Conversation flows gently. Not hurriedly. The captain shares small pieces of news gathered from nearby villages. A new schoolhouse has opened inland. The blacksmith's eldest son has become an apprentice shipbuilder. Someone's cow wandered into the churchyard during Sunday service. Apparently, the cow behaved with perfect dignity. The congregation found the situation rather more amusing. The keeper chuckles softly. Life continues beyond the lighthouse, carrying its own collection of ordinary stories. In return, the keeper offers news of the coast. Nothing dramatic. The winter storms have been mild. A family of robins nested successfully beside the garden. The southern fence required repairs after strong winds. A pod of dolphins appeared offshore 2 weeks earlier. The captain listens with genuine interest. For sailors, local knowledge is valuable. Every small observation adds another piece to the larger picture of the sea. At last, Captain Ellis reaches into a canvas satchel resting beside his chair. I nearly forgot. He produces a carefully wrapped parcel. Thought you might enjoy this. The keeper unties the string. Inside rests a book. Its dark green cover is beautifully bound. The pages remain crisp and unopened. The title reads, Travels Along the Northern Coast. The keeper's eyes brighten. You remembered. The captain shrugs modestly. The bookseller asked whether the Lighthouse fellow still liked travel journals. I certainly do. Then I suppose I've chosen correctly. For several moments, the keeper simply holds the book. There is something deeply satisfying about a story not yet begun. Every unopened page promises quiet evenings by the fire. Unknown places. New voices. Fresh ideas carried across the sea inside nothing more than paper and ink. He thanks the captain once again. This time. Perhaps even more warmly than before. Eventually, the tide reminds everyone that it is time to leave. The rowboat is pushed gently back into the water. The deckhand climbs aboard first. Captain Ellis shakes the keeper's hand firmly. Same time next month. Weather permitting. The captain laughs. Weather always has the final word. That it does. The oars dip once more into the calm water. Splash. Pull. Splash. Pull. Soon the little boat reaches the waiting cutter. The sails are raised. The wind catches them gently. Slowly, the vessel turns toward the open sea. The keeper watches until it becomes a small white shape against the blue horizon. Then smaller still. Finally. Only the sea remains. He carries the new book into the cottage and places it carefully upon the shelf beside his favorite chair. The fresh supplies rest neatly in the pantry. The oil barrels stand ready inside the storage room. The rope hangs coiled upon its hook. Everything feels comfortably prepared for the weeks ahead. Outside, the lighthouse rises proudly above the cliffs, unchanged by the morning's visitors. Soon evening will arrive. The lamp will be filled with fresh oil. The great Fresnel lens will catch another flame. Its steady beam will sweep once more across the darkening sea. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the little supply boat will continue its own quiet journey, carrying provisions, letters, stories, and small kindnesses from one lonely lighthouse to the next, gently reminding every keeper along the coast that even the most peaceful solitude is occasionally connected to the wider world by the welcome sight of a familiar sail on the horizon. The morning walk around the cliffs. Long before breakfast. Long before the kettle begins to sing. And long before the first fishing boat appears beyond the horizon. The lighthouse keeper takes a walk. Not because anyone has told him to. Not because it appears in an official handbook. Simply because the morning seems to invite it. Over the years, this quiet walk has become as much a part of his day as lighting the great lamp itself. The cliffs have become familiar companions. Each bend in the path. Each weathered stone. Each patch of wild grass. Every morning they greet him exactly as old friends do. Without ceremony. Without expectation. Simply by being there. The eastern sky has only just begun to brighten. The stars nearest the horizon are quietly fading. Above, a few stubborn constellations still remain, reluctant to surrender the night. The sea below is neither black nor blue. Instead, it rests in that beautiful in-between color that exists only for a few precious minutes before sunrise. The keeper steps outside. His boots settle onto the dew-covered path. The cool morning air fills his lungs. Every breath carries the scent of salt, damp earth, seaweed, and distant pine carried inland by the breeze. There is no perfume quite like the coast at dawn. His walking stick taps softly against the ground. Tap. Step. Tap. Step. The rhythm never changes. The path itself is hardly more than a narrow trail worn smooth by many years of careful footsteps. Some sections cross open grassland. Others pass close to the cliff edge, where low stone walls offer gentle protection from the steep drop below. The keeper never rushes. He knows exactly where every loose stone waits. Exactly which patches become slippery after rain. Exactly where the rabbits like to hide among the long grass. The landscape has become part of his memory. Just ahead, the first gull of the morning announces itself. Its sharp cry echoes across the quiet coastline. Almost immediately another answers from farther down the cliffs. Within moments, several more voices join the conversation. The keeper smiles. It sounds rather like a committee meeting that has begun before anyone prepared an agenda. The gulls appear deeply committed to discussing something important. What that might be remains their secret. A gentle breeze moves across the headland. The tall grasses sway together like waves upon a green sea. Tiny drops of dew tremble at the tips of every blade. As the first rays of sunlight reach the cliffs, each droplet catches the light. For one brief moment, the entire hillside sparkles. Millions of tiny diamonds scattered across the earth. Then, almost as quickly as they appeared, they begin to disappear into the warming air. Morning performs many beautiful tricks. One must simply rise early enough to witness them. The keeper pauses beside a weathered stone bench overlooking the sea. It has stood here longer than anyone remembers. Perhaps shepherds once rested here. Perhaps fishermen. Perhaps another lighthouse keeper many decades ago. The stone has grown smooth from years of wind and weather. Lichen paints gentle patches of silver and pale green across its surface. The keeper brushes away a few fallen leaves before sitting. There is no particular reason to hurry onward. The sea is patient. He chooses to be patient as well. Below, the tide is beginning to retreat. Dark rocks slowly emerge from beneath the water. Small tide pools glisten in the growing light. Even from this height, the keeper can occasionally spot tiny crabs scurrying between the stones. A seal lifts its head briefly above the waves. It studies the cliffs with calm curiosity. The keeper raises one hand in greeting. The seal disappears again without comment. Perhaps seals consider waving unnecessary. As he continues walking, he notices familiar signs that only regular visitors would recognize. The old hawthorn tree has begun producing tiny buds. Spring cannot be far away. A cluster of yellow wildflowers has appeared beside the southern path. The blackberry bushes remain bare for now, but their branches already seem slightly less asleep than they were a few weeks ago. Nature never truly stands still. Even during winter, quiet work continues beneath the surface. The keeper has learned that change often whispers long before it speaks. Halfway around the cliffs, the path narrows. To one side rises a grassy hillside. To the other, the land falls steeply toward the sea. The keeper always slows here. Not because the path is dangerous. Because the view deserves attention. Far out upon the horizon, the morning sun finally lifts itself above the water. At first, only a thin line of gold appears. Then half a circle. Then the whole glowing sun. Instantly, the sea transforms. Silver becomes gold. Shadows retreat. The world seems to wake all at once. The keeper removes his cap for a moment. Not from necessity. Simply from gratitude. He has watched thousands of sunrises. None have ever become ordinary. The path eventually leads toward a small patch of wild heather growing close to the lighthouse. In late summer, these hills become purple with blossoms. Today only the sturdy stems remain. Even so, they possess a quiet beauty. The wind gently rustles through them. Some plants shout with bright flowers. Heather prefers quiet conversations. The keeper finds that rather admirable. Near the cottage fence waits an old friend. The robin. It lands upon a wooden post with perfect confidence. Its bright chest glows warmly in the morning light. The little bird watches the keeper carefully. Then hops closer. Another hop. Then another. Experience has taught them both the morning routine. The keeper reaches into his coat pocket and produces a few crumbs of yesterday's bread. He scatters them gently onto the grass. The robin wastes no time. Breakfast has arrived. Neither of them seems particularly surprised. Some friendships grow so naturally that they no longer require introductions. Returning to the lighthouse, the keeper notices how the white tower catches the early sunlight. The stone walls glow softly against the blue sky. The lantern room shines like polished crystal. From this angle, the tower appears both sturdy and graceful. Built to withstand storms. Yet elegant enough to belong among the cliffs. He has seen this view nearly every day for years. Still, it pleases him every single morning. There are some sights that refuse to become ordinary. The cottage chimney now releases a thin ribbon of pale smoke into the cool air. The fire inside still burns gently from earlier. Soon the kettle will boil. Breakfast will be waiting. Fresh bread. A little butter. Perhaps blackberry preserves from last summer. And, naturally, a comforting cup of tea. The morning walk has quietly prepared him for the day ahead. Not by exhausting him, but by reminding him exactly where he belongs. Before stepping inside, the keeper turns for one final look toward the sea. A single fishing boat now moves slowly across the calm water. The gulls continue their endless conversations above the cliffs. The breeze carries the scent of salt and spring. The lighthouse stands patiently behind him, ready for another evening's duty. Everything feels wonderfully familiar. The same path. The same horizon. The same faithful tower. Yet no two mornings are ever truly identical. A different cloud. A different bird. A different breeze. A different shade of sunlight dancing upon the waves. Perhaps that is why the keeper never tires of his morning walks. They gently remind him that even the quietest life contains endless small discoveries for those willing to slow down and notice them. And with that peaceful thought, he opens the cottage door, hangs his walking stick beside the entrance, and smiles as the welcoming aroma of fresh tea drifts through the warm little kitchen, promising another calm and ordinary day beside the endless sea. Letters that take weeks to arrive. There are few sounds more welcome at a lonely lighthouse than the gentle knock upon the cottage door. Not because the keeper expects visitors. Quite the opposite. Visitors are wonderfully rare. Which means that every knock carries the possibility of something special. Perhaps fresh supplies. Perhaps a friendly sailor. Or perhaps a letter. In the 19th century, letters travel at the speed of horses, sailing ships, and favorable weather. No message arrives in an instant. A single page may spend weeks crossing the countryside. Another may drift across the sea before finally finding its destination. Patience is not merely appreciated. It is required. The lighthouse keeper understands this better than most. The morning begins quietly. A pale mist hangs over the coastline. The cliffs seem softer than usual, their edges blurred gently by the cool sea air. The lighthouse stands like a silent guardian rising above the fog. Its white stone walls glow faintly beneath the first hints of daylight. Inside the cottage, the keeper prepares breakfast as always. Fresh bread. A little butter. A pot of tea warming over the fire. Nothing unusual. Yet somehow, the day feels different. He cannot explain why. Sometimes the heart notices small changes before the mind does. After breakfast, he begins polishing the brass fittings in the lantern room. The familiar cloth moves in slow circles. Every polished surface catches a little more light than before. Outside, the fog gradually begins to lift. The sea reveals itself piece by piece. First the nearest rocks. Then the small cove below. Finally, the distant horizon. And there, almost hidden among the morning haze, a tiny boat. Not the monthly supply cutter. Too small. Just a local fisherman making his way along the coast. The keeper returns to his work. By late morning, footsteps crunch softly along the gravel path. A moment later comes a gentle knock. 3 slow taps. The keeper opens the door. Standing outside is Thomas, the village postman. Well, calling him a postman hardly tells the whole story. Thomas also delivers newspapers. Carries small parcels. Passes along village news. Occasionally helps repair fences. And once, according to Captain Ellis, even assisted a farmer in rescuing an unusually stubborn pig from a muddy ditch. Life in small coastal communities encourages many talents. Good morning, Thomas says with a cheerful smile. And a fine morning to you. I've something for you. From his worn leather satchel, he carefully removes 3 envelopes. They are tied together with a simple piece of twine. The paper has yellowed slightly during its journey. One corner bears the faint stain of seawater. Another carries the smudge of dusty fingerprints left by countless hands along the way. Each envelope has traveled farther than many people ever will. The keeper thanks him warmly. Letters are never taken for granted. Not here. Not anywhere along the coast. Thomas accepts a cup of tea before continuing his rounds. The two men sit for a few peaceful minutes beside the fire. They speak of ordinary things. The weather. The condition of the roads inland. A fox seen near the old mill. The unusually early arrival of spring flowers. No conversation feels hurried. Both men understand that good company is worth a few extra minutes. Eventually, Thomas gathers his satchel. There'll likely be more next month. I'll look forward to it. The postman tips his cap. Then disappears slowly along the winding coastal path until the mist gently swallows him from sight. For several moments, the keeper simply looks at the letters resting upon the table. He does not open them immediately. There is no urgency. The words have already waited weeks. They can wait another minute. He studies the handwriting. The first envelope comes from his younger sister. He recognizes her careful script at once. She has always written every letter as neatly as if preparing it for a schoolmaster. The second carries the seal of the Lighthouse authority. Official business, no doubt. The third. The handwriting is unfamiliar. Curious. He begins with his sister's letter. The paper crackles softly as he unfolds it. Her words are simple. She writes about her small village. The apple trees blossoming earlier than expected. A neighbor whose old horse finally retired after many faithful years pulling the village cart. The birth of twin lambs on a nearby farm. She asks whether the sea has been calm this winter. Whether the lighthouse garden survived the frosts. Whether he is still reading before the fire every evening. The keeper smiles. She knows him well. Some questions are asked not because the answer is unknown, but because asking itself is an expression of affection. Inside the envelope rests a pressed flower. Tiny. Blue. Perfectly preserved between two sheets of paper. A forget-me-not. The keeper lifts it carefully. Its delicate petals have survived the entire journey. He places it inside his favorite book until he can find a safer place. Some gifts occupy almost no space at all. Yet somehow they become priceless. His second letter contains exactly what he expected. Official instructions. A reminder that inspectors may visit during the summer. A request to record fog conditions with greater detail in the nightly logbook. Nothing difficult. Nothing surprising. He folds the letter neatly and places it inside a wooden drawer reserved for important documents. Rules, he has learned, deserve organization. Now only the final envelope remains. The unfamiliar handwriting belongs to an elderly gentleman named Mr. Hawthorne. It takes the keeper several moments to remember. Then it comes back. Years ago, while visiting another harbor, they had shared a long conversation at an inn. Both had admired old travel journals. Both enjoyed history. Before parting, they promised to exchange letters someday. Apparently, someday has arrived. Mr. Hawthorne writes from a village nearly 200 miles away. He describes his retirement. His little garden. The church bells that wake him every Sunday. He has recently finished reading a remarkable book about Arctic explorers and believes the keeper would enjoy it. He encloses a list of recommended titles. At the bottom of the page, he writes, "Though we have met only once, I hope this letter finds you beside a warm fire and a peaceful sea." The keeper reads that sentence twice. Then smiles quietly. It is a pleasant thing to be remembered. The afternoon slips by almost unnoticed. The letters remain upon the table beside his teacup. Every now and then, he reads a paragraph again. Not because he missed it. Because familiar words often become richer the second time. Outside, the wind carries the scent of salt across the cliffs. The lighthouse casts its long shadow toward the sea. The robin visits the garden fence as usual. Life continues. Yet somehow it feels gently connected to places far beyond the horizon. Later, the keeper unlocks a small wooden chest kept beneath his bed. Inside rests a carefully tied bundle of old letters. Some date back 20 years. Others even farther. The paper has softened with age. The ink has faded slightly. Yet every page still carries the unmistakable voice of the person who wrote it. His father's careful handwriting. His mother's cheerful notes reminding him not to skip proper meals. Christmas greetings from old friends. Letters from fellow keepers posted at distant lighthouses along the coast. He has never thrown a single one away. Books preserve stories. Letters preserve people. There is an important difference. As evening approaches, he lights the great lamp once more. The Fresnel lens catches the growing flame and sends it sweeping confidently across the darkening sea. Far below, gentle waves roll steadily toward the cliffs. The day's letters now rest safely inside the little wooden chest. Not hidden. Simply protected. One day, years from now, another keeper may discover them. Perhaps he will wonder about the quiet man who once lived beside this lonely tower. What books he read. What gardens he planted. Who wrote to him. And whether those letters made the long winters feel just a little less lonely. The answer, resting quietly between faded pages and carefully folded envelopes, is yes. Because although the lighthouse stood far from busy towns and crowded streets, every letter that arrived carried something far more valuable than ink upon paper. It carried voices. Memories. Friendship. And the comforting reminder that no matter how distant the coastline might seem, the human heart has always known how to cross great oceans, one carefully written letter at a time. The art of making the perfect cup of tea. There are many important skills a 19th-century lighthouse keeper must master. He must know how to trim a lamp wick until it burns with a clean, steady flame. He must understand the moods of the sea and the language of the weather. He must climb hundreds of spiral steps without complaint, even in the middle of a cold winter night. He must keep careful records, maintain complicated machinery, and notice the smallest change along the coastline. These are serious responsibilities. Essential ones. Yet if you were to ask the keeper which skill quietly improves almost every day of his life, he might smile and answer. Making a proper cup of tea. Not because tea solves every problem, but because it makes ordinary moments feel wonderfully complete. The day begins with a light rain. Not the sort that sends sailors rushing for shelter. Just a gentle drizzle that softens the cliffs and leaves tiny pearls of water clinging to every blade of grass. The sea wears a peaceful shade of gray. The sky seems wrapped in layers of soft cloud. Everything moves a little more slowly. The keeper rather enjoys mornings like these. Rain gives the world permission to be unhurried. After extinguishing the great lamp at sunrise, he returns to the cottage. His wool coat hangs neatly beside the door. His boots rest upon a small iron tray to dry. The fire in the hearth still holds enough warmth from the night before to awaken easily. He kneels and places 2 pieces of seasoned oak upon the glowing embers. A gentle breath. A quiet crackle. Soon bright flames begin dancing once again. The little cottage slowly fills with comforting warmth. Before doing anything else, he reaches for the kettle. The kettle is made of black iron. It has accompanied him through so many seasons that he no longer remembers exactly when he first acquired it. Its handle has grown smooth with years of use. Tiny marks left by countless evenings surround the base. It is not beautiful in the way polished silver is beautiful. It possesses another kind of beauty. The kind earned through faithful service. The keeper fills it with fresh water drawn from the well behind the cottage. Rainwater serves well for the garden. Good tea deserves fresh spring water. Small details matter. As the kettle rests above the fire, the keeper opens a round tin decorated with faded blue flowers. Inside waits loose black tea. The leaves are dry and curled tightly upon themselves. He pauses for just a moment. Even before hot water touches them, they carry a gentle earthy fragrance. Tea has traveled an astonishing distance to reach this lonely lighthouse. Months ago, these leaves were growing upon distant hillsides far across the world. They crossed oceans inside great merchant ships. Passed through busy ports. Journeyed inland by wagon. Finally, they arrived upon the monthly supply boat. Every cup contains a remarkably long story. The keeper owns only one teapot. It is made of sturdy brown stoneware. Simple. Reliable. The glaze has developed tiny lines over the years, creating delicate patterns that only time can produce. He warms the pot first by pouring a little hot water inside. The warmth spreads gently through the clay. Only then does he add the tea leaves. A small scoop. Not too much. Not too little. Experience has quietly taught him the perfect measure. Some knowledge cannot be written in books. It simply grows through repetition. Soon the kettle begins its familiar song. Not a loud whistle. Just a gentle murmur that gradually becomes a cheerful hum. The keeper never lets the water boil too fiercely. Water that grows impatient rarely makes the finest tea. He lifts the kettle carefully and pours. Steam rises immediately. The room fills with a rich, comforting aroma. The tea leaves begin their slow transformation. The keeper places the lid firmly upon the pot. Now comes perhaps the most difficult part of the entire process. Waiting. Modern life, the keeper sometimes imagines, would probably find this rather inconvenient. Tea cannot be hurried. Not properly. If poured too soon, it tastes weak. Leave it too long, and it grows bitter. Somewhere between those two moments lies perfection. Fortunately, the lighthouse keeper has become exceptionally skilled at waiting. He waits for storms to pass. For sunrise to arrive. For supply boats to appear on the horizon. For gardens to grow. Waiting for tea feels wonderfully easy by comparison. While the tea quietly steeps, he slices a loaf of fresh bread baked the previous afternoon. The crust crackles gently beneath the knife. Inside, the bread remains soft and warm. A small jar of blackberry preserve sits upon the table. The berries were gathered during late summer from bushes growing along the cliff paths. The keeper remembers that sunny afternoon. His basket filling slowly. The robin following at a respectful distance, perhaps hoping a berry might accidentally fall. It had. The robin had seemed pleased. At last, the tea is ready. He pours it slowly through a small metal strainer into his favorite mug. The color is deep amber, almost glowing in the morning light. A thin ribbon of steam curls gracefully upward. He wraps both hands around the warm cup before taking the first sip. There is no need to rush. The first sip of the morning deserves full attention. Warm. Smooth. Comforting. Exactly as it should be. The keeper smiles. Another successful cup. He carries the mug to the window overlooking the sea. Outside, the rain continues falling softly. Tiny circles appear wherever drops touch the puddles gathered along the path. Far below, waves rise and fall with quiet determination. The lighthouse tower stands reflected faintly in the wet stones surrounding the cottage. Everything seems calmer during rainfall. Even the gulls have become unusually quiet. Perhaps they too appreciate peaceful mornings. The keeper remembers the first cup of tea he ever prepared for himself. He had been little more than a young apprentice. Certain that making tea could not possibly require much thought. He added far too many leaves. Forgot to warm the teapot. Allowed the water to boil much too long. The result had been memorable. Not in a particularly pleasant way. His old mentor had taken one careful sip. Smiled kindly. Then suggested that perhaps the garden might enjoy the rest. The tomatoes, apparently, showed no complaints. Years later, the keeper occasionally prepares tea for visitors. Captain Ellis always prefers his tea strong enough, as he jokingly claims, to stand a spoon upright. The village postman likes just a touch of milk. The little girl who once climbed the lighthouse with her family accepted only warm milk with honey, feeling quite grown up while holding her little cup beside the adults. The keeper enjoys remembering such moments. A shared cup of tea often becomes a shared memory. On especially cold winter evenings, he sometimes brews a second pot after lighting the great lamp. The fire burns brightly. The lantern room glows above. The wind hums softly around the tower. Book in one hand. Tea in the other. There are certainly grander pleasures in the world. Few, however, feel more peaceful. As afternoon quietly drifts toward evening, the keeper rinses the teapot with warm water and leaves it upside down upon a folded cloth to dry. The tea tin is carefully closed. Everything returns to its proper place. There is satisfaction in ending small tasks well. The kitchen once again appears neat and welcoming. Ready for tomorrow morning. Ready for another quiet beginning. Outside, the clouds finally begin to part. A shaft of golden sunlight slips through, touching the lighthouse tower and setting its white walls aglow. The sea brightens from gray to silver. The robin returns to its familiar fence post, shaking rainwater from its feathers before beginning an energetic search for worms. The keeper finishes the final sip from his mug. It has grown only slightly cooler now. Still pleasant. Still comforting. He sets the empty cup upon the windowsill and glances toward the great tower that soon will need its evening preparations. Another night is waiting. Another lamp will be lit. Another faithful beam will sweep across the darkening sea. And when dawn returns, bringing with it fresh light, quiet waves, and another peaceful morning beside the cliffs, the old black kettle will once again find its place above the fire. For in a life built upon steady routines and gentle purpose, there are few comforts as dependable as a well-tended lighthouse. And a perfectly brewed cup of tea enjoyed while the rest of the world is still waking. The tiny workshop beneath the tower. Every lighthouse has a heart. Most visitors assume it is the lantern room high above the sea. That is certainly the brightest part. The most famous part. The place where the great Fresnel lens catches the evening flame and sends its faithful beam across the dark water. But the keeper knows another place deserves equal respect. A small workshop beneath the tower. It is not grand. It has no polished brass or shining glass. No breathtaking view of the horizon. Its walls are plain stone. Its floor is worn smooth by many years of steady footsteps. Yet within this quiet little room, countless small repairs ensure that the lighthouse continues doing its important work, night after peaceful night. The morning begins with clear skies. The rain that visited yesterday has drifted far out to sea. Sunlight pours through the cottage windows, warming the wooden table where breakfast has only recently ended. The keeper washes his mug, dries it carefully, and places it back upon its familiar shelf. There is satisfaction in returning every object to its proper place. A tidy room has a calming effect upon the mind. Today's weather promises a rare gift. Several uninterrupted hours for maintenance. No approaching storms. No expected visitors. No urgent deliveries. Simply a quiet day for caring for the many little things that quietly support a lighthouse. The keeper gathers a small wooden toolbox. It is older than some of the trees growing along the cliffs. The corners are reinforced with brass. The handle has darkened from decades of use. Inside rests a collection of simple tools. A hammer with a smooth ash handle. Several screwdrivers. A small hand plane. Tiny files. An oil can with a long narrow spout. Needles. Twine. A folding ruler made of polished boxwood. Each tool occupies its own familiar place. The workshop sits at the base of the lighthouse tower. Opening the heavy oak door releases a familiar scent. Wood shavings. Linseed oil. Beeswax. Metal filings. A hint of salt carried in from the sea. It is a smell that speaks of honest work. Nothing here is extravagant. Everything is practical. Along one wall stands a sturdy workbench. Its surface bears thousands of tiny marks. Each scratch tells the story of a repair completed years ago. A carefully sharpened chisel. A newly fitted hinge. A broken chair restored to usefulness. Time has written its history into the wood. Above the bench hangs a collection of neatly arranged tools. The keeper believes tools should never be hidden in drawers if they are used every day. Hooks hold each one in perfect order. The saw. The brace and bit. The pliers. The measuring square. He can reach for any of them without looking. His hands know the arrangement almost as well as his eyes do. There is comfort in such familiarity. Near the window rests a small vise firmly attached to the workbench. It has held countless objects over the years. Broken lantern handles. Loose bolts. Bent iron brackets. Today, however, it waits patiently for something rather less dramatic. The handle of a wooden bucket. One side has begun to loosen after many seasons of carrying water from the well. The bucket still functions. But the keeper has learned never to wait until something breaks completely. A small repair today often prevents a large inconvenience tomorrow. He tightens the handle carefully. A fresh wooden peg replaces the worn one. The fit is snug. Not forced. Wood, he knows, prefers gentle persuasion. After a few careful taps with the hammer, the bucket feels solid once again. He lifts it. Tests the balance. Perfect. The repair takes less than 15 minutes. Yet it may last another decade. Good craftsmanship rarely announces itself loudly.